listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
A happy new year, I suppose, as the Reverend I.M. Jolly used to put it, before Hogmanay television in Scotland grew so execrable it was worth turning over to Netflix for the bells. But it hasn't started all that well, at least not for everyone. Ghislaine Maxwell is off to the penitentiary, probably for the rest of her natural life, unless something happens to her on the way there. And Tony Blair is on the way to Buckingham Palace, unless we can make something happen to that plan on the way there. Boris Johnson's on the way to hell in a hell cart, if you believe the opinion polls today, putting him 19 points behind a block of wood called Keir Starmer in the red wall constituencies that gave him his 80-seat majority. Mind you, Britain would be in a hell cart also were that to happen. We'll be discussing it with prominent Conservative Steve Norris. The Middle East, well, it's business as usual. There's bombs flying, the angel of death flying both ways, and it's only January the 2nd. So fasten your seatbelts. This is going to be rock and roll radio with pictures, a special New Year's edition. Back, fully live, including your calls, your tweets, and your emails. Stay tuned. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway.
This is Radio Sputnik.
Well, a moment or two before the new year, I read the dread news that Tony Blair, the war criminal, the man responsible for 1 million dead people in Iraq, the man who sent extremism pulsing across the whole world, including here in our own country, including in this postal district SW1. The man who, with his friend Bill Clinton, paved the way for the economic crash by their grotesque light touch deregulation of the banks and the finance houses here in London, the abolition of the Glass-Steagall Act in the US, and the light touch of Gordon Brown and Tony Blair brought us all crashing down, and we have not recovered fully from it even now. All these years of austerity are because of the peculiar love affair between Tony Blair and Bill Clinton and the finance industry in the city of London. But of course it was his even more peculiar relationship with the next US president, the simian George W. Bush, whose brain he tried to be, but who brought the world almost to destruction. A destruction which continues to pulse around the world and will do as long as the lifespan of the youngest person watching or listening to this show tonight. The entire world has been deformed, defaced, self-harmed by Tony Blair and George W. Bush's invasion and occupation of Iraq, which killed 1 million people in Iraq. But the dead, you can't stop counting yet. Now, I don't want to say too much more about Tony Blair because time is my enemy and everybody out there knows how I feel about him and how dedicated I am to holding him to account. The only place I want to hear him speak is in the dock at The Hague, at the International Criminal Court, facing trial for war crimes and for crimes against humanity. I will never give that up. My film, The Killings of Tony Blair, and even my latest film, Killing Kelly, are about him. So I've said almost as much about him as I have time to say this evening. Most of my remarks will have to be aimed, and I'm genuinely sorry to say, because if you're a regular viewer and listener, you'll already know that I long ago have forsworn the expression of my actual views about monarchy, about the system of honours under the unelected, unaccountable monarchy that we have here in Britain. I forswore it on the basis of my knowledge of the deep respect that the British people have towards the current monarch, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth. It was always my plan to wait until the demise of Her Majesty the Queen to launch my campaign for a referendum in Britain on our transformation into a democratic republic of a kind suited to a grown-up country many hundreds of years old in the 21st century. I wish her long life, but she's already had a long life, and that question will have to be posed upon her demise. But tonight I find myself in the unusual position of beseeching Her Majesty the Queen to turn back from a disastrous error of judgment which she has made. Now, I normally absolve Buckingham Palace for other decisions because I know that they are made for the Queen by the Prime Minister, but not this one. The decision to not only elevate the mass murderer, the war criminal, Tony Blair, to a knighthood, but to elevate him to the highest possible rank of knighthood, to make him one of but 24 people wearing garters, sitting around her table, as the most eminent 24 people in the land, was a decision made only by Her Majesty the Queen. And in the sea of troubles being faced by the royal family, Prince William's affairs, Prince Harry's conduct in realms overseas, the alleged crimes of Prince Andrew, the general weirdness of the heir to the throne, Prince Charles, and his missus. I simply cannot understand who in Buckingham Palace thought it was a good idea to invite to that select table a man dripping in blood, dripping in the blood of 1 million innocents, to invite him to your table, Your Majesty. Suggests to me that you or whoever made this decision in Buckingham Palace must have temporarily, at least, taken leave of your senses. Did you not see, Your Majesty, the millions of your subjects on the streets of Britain against the Iraq War in 2003? Millions of them. Even before we knew what we know now, that it was all a pack of lies. Don't you see, Your Majesty, those families of our servicemen who were sent to their deaths or their disfigurement on a lie? Don't you see, Your Majesty, that Tony Blair lied to your Parliament, lied to your armed forces, lied to your councillor, Sir John Chilcot, rest in peace, lied even to you, Your Majesty, must have lied even to you. Do you not see, Your Majesty, the hundreds of thousands of your subjects who have signed the petition in 36 hours, hundreds of thousands of them, demanding that you rescind this almost insane decision that you have made? And it was you who made it, not Boris Johnson, not Sir Keir Starmer, who welcomed it on behalf of the Labour Party, not the Speaker of the House of Commons. Your Majesty, it was you who made this decision to invite this war criminal, to reward this war criminal with your select company and your order of the Garter. None of us will address him as Sir Anthony or Sir Tony. He will always be a war criminal to the majority of people in your realm. How then can you have reached such a decision? That petition must reach 1 million signatures. We had the Million Man Woman March in London, which gathered in your royal park. Your Majesty, I know because the minister called me to say that we must call it off because we would damage your grass in your royal park. Can you not see, Your Majesty, the uprising that is underway in this country over this decision that you made? Can't you see it compounds all of the problems of the British monarchy just at a time when you can least afford it? Can't you see that it hastens the day of the end of your family's power in this land? Because if that's the kind of use that your family's power is to be put to, then taken together with all of the other things in your sea of troubles, the monarchy, frankly, does not deserve to outlive your good self. I mean no disrespect or animus towards you. I feel none, and I seek to express none. I'm beseeching you, Your Majesty, I beseech you to turn back from this disastrous course of action. I beg you to turn back from this disastrous course that will bring no good to anyone, least of all you and your monarchy. Did you not see, Your Majesty, the feelings of the people in your Commonwealth, in Africa, in Australia, in Canada, in the Caribbean? Did you not see how people felt about the terrible crime of the invasion and subsequent occupation of Iraq? Do you not see us, Your Majesty? Do you not hear us, Your Majesty? I promise you, as long as God gives me breath, I will seek to get 1 million signatures on that petition. And I ask all of those watching and listening today, not just to sign it, but to bring me 10 other signators. Let's make this petition as big as that demonstration in Hyde Park on the 15th of February 2003. Let's make this the biggest petition in history. The Parliament site for petitions has refused to accept a petition on this matter. So change.com it is. It's tinyurl.com/stop Sir Blair. Don't do it, Your Majesty. Don't do it. It's not too late. Think again, Your Majesty. Turn, turn, turn. As might Ghislaine Maxwell, yet. At this rate, they'll be putting her in the Privy Council. Dame Ghislaine, the child sex trafficker, is still being referred to in the British media as a socialite, whatever that means. A socialite who preyed on young, poor girls to lure them like a Pied Piper into the bed of the filthy paedophile rapist Jeffrey Epstein. A friend of the rich and the powerful, some of them in the royal family. A friend of presidents and kings. A man who was gathering every piece of pornographic evidence he could of the perversions of the high and mighty in the service of sundry intelligence agencies. Well, she's now been found guilty against all of the predictions, all of those who said it could never happen. Now await the sentencing of Ghislaine Maxwell, the daughter, of course, of the greatest British thief of the 20th century, the publisher Robert Maxwell. The scars from whom I could show you if you'd like to see them. But why did the judge then seal all the papers, just like Dr. David Kelly's post-mortem and other medical and tribunal evidence? Why did that happen, Your Honor, the judge in New York? After all, was Ghislaine Maxwell pimping only for Jeffrey Epstein? Did all these poor girls end up in only one bed, the bed of Epstein? Or were they passed around like playthings between one rich and powerful man and another? I know what I think. I know what most people think. The idea that Ghislaine was pimp only to Epstein is positively preposterous. If she was pimping for him, she was pimping for his friends. And we demand to know who those friends were. We demand to know if our presidents, our kings, our leading politicians, journalists and broadcasters were amongst those feasting on the dripping roast of human flesh procured by the contemptible Miss Maxwell. No socialite, just a pervert who pimped for perverts. It's all coming up over the next 2 hours and 40 minutes, because this is the mother of all talk shows.
Radio Sputnik.
time, weather, and highways.
Now, don't forget, you can download the podcast of this program, a finely edited highlights version of this 3-hour epic. It's being listened to now all around the world. Huge numbers are downloading the, as it were, compact version of the show. Of course, in the UK and the US, but listen to these countries that downloaded it last week: Japan, India, Denmark, Saudi Arabia, Korea, Switzerland, UAE, and Hong Kong in China. All of those had significant audiences of last week's show. Search Moats, M-O-A-T-S, on the app where you get your podcast from.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
There's a poll running on my Twitter feed, on my YouTube channel, and on my Telegram channel. Should Tony Blair be A, knighted, B, indicted? Get voting now. Have your say. And please, in the course of this show tonight, whilst you're watching, whilst you're listening, go to change.com. Go to tinyurl.com/stop Sir Blair. I am determined to get the number up to 1 million signatories to stop this decision to knight Tony Blair. They don't have knights in Israel, but if they did, my next guest would definitely be a worthy knight. He has to wear a good suit of armor because he is the greatest living Israeli. He is the journalist in Israel. He is the truth teller in Israel. And he is a regular now on our show, I'm proud to say. Please welcome Gideon Levy of Haaretz newspaper. Gideon, a happy new year to you. It hasn't started well in your part of the world.
Absolutely, and it's such a great honor to be with you, George, again.
Thank you, brother. The bombs are flying again. Bring us up to date on that one first, will you?
It was yesterday morning when I was jogging in the park at 6 o'clock in the morning, New Year, when I heard those two strange noises in the sky. It couldn't be thunders. And then I realized that those were rockets launched from Gaza, which fall in the sea. Another way of Gaza to remind its existence, another way of Gaza to remind its unbelievable humanitarian problem.
Yes, these two rockets landed in the sea. From the pictures I've seen, the Israeli retaliation hasn't landed in the sea.
No, the Israeli retaliation is always 100 times more cruel, more brutal, but I hope nobody was injured or killed. As far as I know, nobody was injured.
And has it stopped for the moment?
Yes, absolutely.
Let's turn then, Gideon, to the proximate reason why I asked you to come on the show this early in the new year. I was struck by, I don't know if you're aware, but I'm one of the few people on the left that spent time underground in apartheid South Africa. Incidentally, every house I slept in, every car I drove in, every dinner I ate was provided by Jewish members of the African National Congress. And the leading voice in civil society, in the latter part, certainly, of the apartheid regime, was Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who, as you know, passed away at a ripe old age. He was so revered that virtually every obituary of him was honeyed. But then I discovered that actually Tutu was being trashed by Israel's greatest supporters, and for all I know, inside Israel itself. What was that all about? How could people who regard themselves as civilized hate Archbishop Tutu, for God's sake?
Look, unfortunately, at least the official Israel is judging human beings only along one criteria. Do you support the Israeli occupation or you don't? If you do support the Israeli occupation, you are a friend of Israel, you are a friend of humanity, you are a hero. If you don't support the Israeli occupation, you are an anti-Semite, you are an enemy, you are a traitor. And no matter what are all your other projects, beliefs, thoughts, theories, nothing. It comes all about supporting or not supporting the occupation. And fortunately enough, Desmond Tutu, the late Desmond Tutu, did not support the Israeli occupation like any person of conscience in the world.
He described it as apartheid, in fact.
How else can you describe it?
A very good answer. A very good answer. Now, so there were no flags at half-mast for him in Israel. Certainly, Israel's loudest mouths in Britain, and I think in the United States, gave the memory of the late Archbishop a good going over. But something tells me history will view Tutu a little more kindly than it might view them, Gideon.
And not only history, I think that even today, who are they and who is Desmond Tutu? Who are they and who are those real freedom fighters? I mean, you can. I've been a few times to South Africa, and when you see what those people were struggling for, and how did they struggle for, and what did they achieve, those are really, this is exactly the kind of people that we lack here in Israel, exactly the kind of people that we lack in Israel, including, as you rightly so mentioned in your introduction, including members of the Jewish community in South Africa who were so brave and so devoted to even sacrifice many times even their lives or their health or their security and going to jail and being injured. Where are those figures in Israel? I wish we had even one. We don't even have one.
Well, so many of them I worked with, Max and Audrey, Coleman, Ronnie, Casserols, the great hero, Joe Slovo, the leader of the armed struggle, his wife murdered by apartheid in Mozambique, Ruth First, Albie Sachs, and so many others. I mean, I can't now, I don't have time to adumbrate them all. I must have met hundreds in my time underground in South Africa. Frankly, any white person that was in the struggle was overwhelmingly likely to be a Jewish member or supporter of the African National Congress. I pointed out at the Oxford Union, Jews don't have to be with apartheid. Some of the greatest Jews in modern history gave their lives struggling against apartheid.
But George, we have to admit that those were the tiny minorities. Because if you look today at the Jewish community in South Africa as a whole, I mean, you can't generalize. I'm sure there are some exceptions, but by and large, they are the greatest supporters of the Israeli occupation. And so are many others. They will condemn any comparison to apartheid, including, by the way, a few of them who were liberals there, who did fight with the ANC, and still they will, part of them, not all of them obviously, but part of them will say, how can you compare the Israeli occupation to South African apartheid? Some others, more courageous and more genuine, will say, you can't compare. The Israeli occupation is so much worse.
Yeah, well, Mandela's grandson has said so. I don't know if Tutu went that far, but so many people who've been able to see both forms of apartheid have have made that very point. Finally, and I'm grateful for your time, as always, Gideon. How's the new fella doing? How could we tell there's a difference now in the Prime Minister's house? Any important differences at all?
Unfortunately not. Not in the issues that both of us, George and I, consider as crucial issues. You see, in the year of 2021, 319 Palestinians paid in their lives. In the same time, only 11 Israelis paid in their life. This proportion by itself tells you the whole story. And who is the terrorist, by the way? The terrorists are those 319, not the 11. So when you conclude a year, which was the most bloody year ever since 2014, we say over 300 Palestinians, most of them were not armed, most of them were either peasants or demonstrators who were struggling for their rights. When you conclude such a year, where exactly is the change? Where exactly is any kind of horizon for a new dawn? We are very far off it.
Gideon Levy, I don't know if you are a religious man. I am, and I pray to God that he preserves you, because we certainly need you there on our show, and indeed, more importantly, still writing for the Israeli public. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Should I do a first question? Probably. In this week in 1987, who was the first female singer to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? 1987, the very first. A, Madonna. B, Aretha Franklin. C, Kate Bush. Answer after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones? With the historical context to tie them together? Well, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host, Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
All talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Well, it was Aretha Franklin in This Week in 1987 who was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. They took their time, didn't they? 1987. Let's go for a quick call before our next guest. It's Ian in Manchester. Go ahead, Ian.
Hello, George. It's Richard.
It's Richard in Manchester. Beg your pardon.
No problem.
Go ahead.
George, we're with you on this big fight. Thank you very much indeed. I've just listened to your monologue, and it sounds like common sense. I don't know what's happened with the Queen, because I've got great admiration for her, along with, you know, the normal members of her family. I know she's had a rough time recently. But how she's come to this conclusion, and also if she does go ahead with it, it will be the most shocking thing that she has ever done in the whole of her reign.
It's a terrible way to end, or she's not ended yet, but coming towards, inevitably, the end of her reign. What a black mark to leave on your record.
Well, rumour has it that he wasn't very well liked by the Queen because of the way that he went against her royal reign.
At the time of Diana.
Yes, and also he became the Messiah within his own mind, within his own lifetime, that he was going to lead no matter what. He brought, I think, 3 or 4 people into his little office most days to make decisions, and all the rest of the MPs were excluded. He was more or less a dictator.
Yeah.
He made himself.
Yeah.
He made himself that. But
He made himself a president, didn't he?
Exactly.
And you can't have a president and a
when he
queen in the same country.
Yes, and when he went to the EU and said he wanted to be the president for life, he changed 6,000 laws in a very short space of time. And they told him he couldn't be it for life, he could only be for 6 months. So if he'd have stayed for life, George, we'd have been fighting Putin today, or we'd be fighting China today. He's an absolute war-crazed maniac. And people have got to go to the Queen and they've got to say, Your Majesty, please listen. Listen to the 17.4 million people who got us Brexit. Because without those 17.4 million, we would have never, ever got out of the EU if Blair had got his way. And he's still advocating to get us back into the EU.
Sure. Well, the Labour Party is now led by Sir Keir, Sir Tony, and Lord Mandelson. I mean, who in their right mind wants to be associated with a party led by those 3?
Absolutely, George. I don't know whether he's done the Queen a favour and got Andrew off the hook with his great friends over in America, the great judges and the other people that he knows very, very well. His little tight, a little cabal of people that he knows within the law circles. Maybe he's done something like that to get this honour. But if I was him, I would say to the British people and come on TV and say, I am very sorry. This should never have been awarded to me. I want it to be taken away from me. I want nothing to do with it. I'm going to leave the country and I'm going to go and live in Brussels. Everybody would be happy.
Yeah, except the Belgians. Thanks, Richard, for that very much indeed. The polls predictably getting a lot of interest. Should Tony Blair be A, knighted, or B, indicted? 2,000 people already have voted. On Twitter, it's 6% knighted. Who are these people? Indicted, 94%. On YouTube, knighted, 5%. Indicted, 95%. On Telegram, always the smartest answer on Telegram, you know. Knighted, 1%. Indicted, 99%. I don't know what the percentages would be about the outcome of the Ghislaine Maxwell trial in New York. We have followed this story right from the beginning, and usually under the expert tutelage of Kirby Sommers, the investigative journalist and author. And of course, it's a pleasure to welcome her back. First of all, Kirby, don't take this the wrong way, but congratulations, because if not for the efforts of, first of all, the victims, but secondly, those that stood up for the victims, then this trial would never have taken place in the first place.
That's true. I want to just say Happy New Year, George.
Happy New Year.
With Ghislaine Maxwell, pretty much in the biggest political scandal since Watergate, and no one really talking about the political implications. I think this is going to be a much better year because she is, at the very least, now in a jail cell with rats. And but I have a lot of information to give you about the case, and I want to thank you.
Yes, please feel free. The floor is yours.
Thanks. And I it has been a 2.5-year effort, as you know, you've seen me do it, of tweeting day after day after day after day, of putting books out, of informing the public that these people were sex traffickers, that they were trafficking not only children, but, women and men and boys who were vulnerable, who were easy to prey upon, who believed false promises, and then who were threatened. So a unanimous jury, as you know, has found Ghislaine Maxwell guilty of 5 out of 6 counts of sex trafficking. She ran in the circles of princes, presidents, and heads of states. And now she sits in a rat-infested cell where she belongs. The message that the attorneys pretty much gave the victims, this is something to be celebrated, but I'm sorry, it's not enough, because while the attorneys told the victims, hey, just say that the message that was sent in the Ghislaine Maxwell case is that no one is above the law. That is not true, because as we know, she was not just finding men. And by the way, what we discovered in the courtroom is that over $30 million passed from Jeffrey Epstein to Ghislaine Maxwell within the short period of time that she was being looked into. So she wasn't being looked into for her entire role with Jeffrey Epstein, which commenced after Robert Maxwell died in very late 1991 through the 2000s. This period that Ghislaine Maxwell was being looked into was a very narrow, focused from 1994 to 2004. 1997 to 2004. Only 4 victims. They're not talking about not only Prince Andrew, but Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, Kevin Spacey, Chris Tucker, Bill Gates, and others. So what this has actually done is that it has put a stop, right? A stop to the information about, well, who were these trafficked persons gifted to? In some cases, they were a gift. In some cases, they were paid for. It wasn't always just Jeffrey Epstein giving, let's say, someone allegedly like Prince Andrew a gift in the form of, in this particular case, Virginia Giuffre, because that's on the record. This was sometimes, he ran an upscale prostitution ring of the minors were, we can't call them prostitutes because that's not what they were, but that's really what he ran. He was a pimp of the highest order, but it's a political scandal. No one's talking about it, and I think it's time we talk about the biggest cover-up in history.
I'm determined to do that, and did so in my introductory remarks. The first question is the one you have just alluded to. Are we to believe that of all the hundreds, or certainly scores of girls, if not hundreds, that they were all being pimped by Ghislaine Maxwell for one man only, for Epstein only? Or is it not logically far more likely that he was sharing these girls with the rich and powerful friends that he very carefully drew around himself?
Well, it's very clear that it's the latter. Mainstream media would like for the world to believe Ghislaine Maxwell was madly in love with Jeffrey Epstein. That's a big lie. And that she would do anything for Jeffrey Epstein. That's a big lie. She was doing it for the money and for the sex, quite frankly. She was part of the acts of violence and of rape against these trafficked persons. And mainstream media has a narrative that they want to stick to. But in real life, as you and I both know, these men, Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, Prince Andrew, Kevin Spacey, Chris Tucker, Bill Gates, and a long list, including Ehud Barak and many, many others, were not hanging around Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell because they were the smart people. They were providing them with sex, bottom line. That's what they were doing. But on the other hand, and you just mentioned it before you brought me on, everything was taped. Everything was taped for the purpose of blackmail. And I've done more poking around and more studying and more talking and more investigative journalism, and the blackmail. We have to figure out what was the blackmail used for, right? So the blackmail was used in order to recruit more people So they weren't just recruiting. We've only seen one side of the operation. We have seen them recruiting young children who then were taught to recruit other young children, right? So that you have a catch-22 situation. So where they can't go to anyone to help them. There's really no one to help them anyway, because all the politicians, all the local law enforcement, they're involved. But they were also targeting wealthy politicians that weren't very high up, and businessmen who had, some money and some prestige, into then flipping, right? Become an informant, tell us stuff that we need. So flipping them, that's part of what they were doing as well. But no, the thing is, there's only so much that advocates like myself and the others that are putting in a lot of hours can do, because look, mainstream media, even as early as today, called her a socialite instead of a child sex rapist.
Yeah, that's happening here on a daily, hourly basis. I don't know if you know that the BBC actually put up for interview Alan Dershowitz without pointing out that he himself has been accused of using these young girls. And there he was on the BBC batting for Ghislaine Maxwell and Prince Andrew.
So that was not a surprise to me, and I'll tell you why. I know you just had on a very nice man who I happen to like and admire from Israel.
Yeah.
And frankly, I have a lot of really good friends in Israel. When Ghislaine Maxwell initially was thought to be missing, I called them up and I'm like, hey, can you poke around? There are nice places to go in Jerusalem. And so I was like, if she's there, she's going to be in these places. But no, they couldn't find her. But look, this was a Mossad operation. I don't want to disparage anyone, but this was a Mossad operation. Alan Dershowitz has worked for the Mossad for forever. I know this personally, but also there's a very good example. Ghislaine Maxwell's sister, Isabel Maxwell, about 10 or 12 years ago, Martin Dillon and Gordon Thomas were getting ready to publish the book, Robert Maxwell, Israel's Super Spy. Isabel Maxwell was living in San Francisco with Al Seckel, who was a bigamist, and really he didn't die. He faked a death. But anyway, she gets on an airplane. She goes to Israel. She sits down with the prime minister. I forget who it was at the time, and with the head of the Mossad. And she's trying to get the book not to be released because she doesn't want the information about her father being a spy, who was already outed by Seymour Hersh, to get out into the public. So she comes back to the United States, but what happens? Alan Dershowitz, and as you have seen, and many people have seen, that Alan Dershowitz gets free access to the press whenever he wants. So does Daphne Barak. So do Ian and Kevin Maxwell. So does Ghislaine Maxwell. They have this ability. So what does Alan Dershowitz do? He goes and he writes a very lengthy piece, destroying the book, saying how horrible it is. And frankly, I'm very honored right now because that's exactly what they're trying to do to me. So that at the time, these authors, prestigious authors, with awards, just really top-notch investigative journalists, were thinking and scratching their heads, why would a professor from Harvard, Alan Dershowitz, be writing this about us? Well, then years later, they discover, he's connected to Ghislaine Maxwell, he's connected to Jeffrey Epstein. We get it now. So that, of course, I knew they were going to bring out Alan Dershowitz because he is their consigliere. However, it backfired.
Yes, it certainly did. Here, the BBC are conducting an inquiry into whose blunder it was to put him up as an impartial witness when in fact he's party pre to the case, big time. It's the sort of BBC inquiry that will probably lead to the people responsible being promoted and their salary enhanced. When can we expect sentencing of Maxwell?
So I want to explain that to you. Sentencing in New York can take about 8 weeks. And the steps are there's a pre-sentence report. So there's an investigation of her background. So whether she's been ever arrested, her schooling, her banking situation, they do a thorough investigation of her life. Now, if her life had been someone else's, in the UK, she had been stopped and arrested for a DUI, I believe in the 1990s. I'm trying to remember the year. But also one of my friends lives in the UK, Matthew Steeples, and he discovered, because he's been poking around, that in 1994, in one of the 2 homes that Robert Maxwell helped buy for Ghislaine, that she was running a house of ill repute in 1994. So the local police were staking out that property for a whole week. And the way they did it was they got access to the property across the way. For 1 week, they had their men sitting there with binoculars looking at the stream of women and men going in and out of the house. And guess what? It stopped. Of course, it had to be courtesy of her good friend, Prince Andrew. But anyway, so none of that stuff is going to be looked into, obviously, because with this pre-sentence report, these are not documented crimes, right? She's gotten away with a lot of crimes, but they look into her family history, they look into her employment, and then they develop a guideline, which they then give to the judge, who then determines what's going to happen. This said, she faces, if from the 5 counts, it's about 65 years.
Wow.
If the judge looks at this and even gives her a sliver of that, it could be 20 years. So de facto, she's facing a life sentence. However, what happens at this point is that this is when they turn around and the prosecution says to her, hey, we're going to be sending you to jail. This is probably, you're going to be in jail for the rest of your life. She just turned 60. So they allow her to do a post-verdict cooperation. At this point, she can decide to give up names, except she's the head. During the trial, the people who were in Jeffrey Epstein's employ and in her employ described her as the number 2 person. So Jeffrey Epstein was the number 1. He's gone. Ghislaine Maxwell was described as being the number 2. So who is she going to give up? She's not going to give up Bill Clinton, who's in it up to his neck and who is very close to Ghislaine. But there's a possibility that the only way out for her is to give up Donald Trump. Donald Trump has been exposed by a couple of writers. Let me just find that information for you, of having, he not only did he wish her well, but he considered giving her a pardon before he left office. He did not do so on the advice of one of his close counsels. And the reason cited was that, well, if he let her go on the federal level, that she would then be pursued on a state level. But she's only got this bargaining chip, so she can decide to say Donald Trump, because she has gone on the record to say that she and Jeffrey Epstein had tapes of both Bill Clinton and Donald Trump. Will she turn on Prince Andrew? She may not turn on him, but she has already damaged his case substantially, because it has now, the fact that Ghislaine Maxwell has just been found guilty, 5 out of 6 counts of sex trafficking children, the most disgusting thing any human being can do is just to do that to children. Well, that means that Virginia Giuffre's credibility has risen and Prince Andrew's has dropped. So why this man is not reaching into his pocket and writing a check and keeping his dear old mother from this trauma at her advanced age does not make sense. I see him having to write a check and run the other way, because this can turn at this point in time, while the case that Prince Andrew is facing is a civil lawsuit, and it's a shame that that it is the victim, Virginia Giuffre, who has to chase Prince Andrew to get the rights. I don't know what the United States pays taxes for. It should be the federal government going after Prince Andrew, and it can turn right now because Ghislaine Maxwell has heard that Prince Andrew has made statements that, well, so what for Ghislaine? Well, I don't know she's going to like that because she, as you know, she's a very vain, self-centered woman. So if she decides to turn and say, okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and offer myself up to, she can no longer be a witness for, but she can be a witness against. So this can now then turn 180%, and Prince Andrew could be facing federal charges. So if I were him, I would pull out a check.
How about this for a possible scenario? Maxwell delivers up Donald Trump, who otherwise might be the next president of the United States, delivers evidence about him that either sends him to jail or certainly destroys any prospect of re-election for him, and Joe Biden gives her a pardon.
That's possible. They're friends. People don't seem to understand that Joe Biden has known Ghislaine Maxwell for a very long time. One of her closest friends lives in Philadelphia. Joe is from Philadelphia. Look, whatever happens to Ghislaine Maxwell is going to happen front-facing. So the public will see one thing. If she's put away in jail, she's going to go to a sort of a minimum security jail. I just want to give you some more information before my time runs out.
Yes.
So she can't really be put into sort of a regular type jail because of her sex offender position, right? So a minimum security facility exclusively is ruled out because she's a sex offender, and so they will kill her if she goes there. So she will go into a low security prison. However, compared to where she is today, a low security prison, it's going to feel like a resort to her because these places have classes and they have places for exercise. But I do want to address, if I may, the rumor that is going around because of a Trump operative saying that, the documents have been sealed. That was a rumor that mainstream media took and ran off with it. The guy's name is Jack Prosebiec, and he is just someone who used to spread lies for Donald Trump. So I have looked at the case record. I have had attorneys look at the case record because I knew I was coming on your show today. And no, there's been no further sealing of records. What happened during the court proceedings were that the documents were redacted, heavily redacted. Not everything was shown to the people who were sitting in the audience, many of whom were independent media and or someone like Julie K. Brown, who represents mainstream media.
Well, look, I'm glad that you brought us up to date on all of that. I hope Maxwell is not surprised by her suicide next week or the week after. I hope that she stays alive to properly suffer for the crimes that she has committed. Coming up in the next hour, Radd Seiger on poor Harry Dunn and Dr. Ranjeet Brar on the escalating Omicron situation. But first, it's the news with Jamie Lowe.
Radio Sputnik News.
Face masks are to be worn in classrooms in England's secondary schools to reduce the spread of the Omicron variant. The government has announced the temporary reintroduction of face coverings aims to address concerns about schools remaining open for face-to-face learning this coming term. However, 6 school staff unions have issued a demand for urgent action to limit the spread of the virus. They warned national exams would be put at risk without further measures. They also called for air cleaning units, financial support for absence cover, help with on-site testing and a relaxation of the Ofsted inspection regime. Schools across the UK are reopening after the Christmas break over the next week, with pupils being asked to take part in on-site COVID testing. Until now, England was one of the only 4 UK nations where face masks were not recommended for pupils in classrooms. Teachers will not have to wear them under the new guidelines. 20 Conservative MPs and peers have called on the Prime Minister to tackle the spiralling cost of living. 5 ex-ministers are among those who have written to the Sunday Telegraph newspaper arguing for a cut in environmental levies and the removal of energy taxes. Their call follows big increases in wholesale gas prices. Experts say average bills could hit £2,000 in 2022. The government says it is meeting suppliers and the regulator regularly to work out how to help consumers. Health Minister Edward Argar said there were a range of measures to help those who feel the squeeze with particular household bills, adding that the economy was bouncing back. The letter to the Telegraph has been organised by the right-wing Net Zero Scrutiny Group of Conservatives, which keeps an eye on the potential consequences of the government's environmental commitments. British government ministers have been tasked with developing robust contingency plans for workplace absences, as the government warned rising cases could see up to a quarter of staff off work. Public sector leaders have been asked to prepare for worst-case scenarios of 10, 20 and 25% absence rates, the Cabinet Office said. The UK has seen record numbers of daily cases over the festive period. Transport, the NHS and schools have already seen the effect of absences. Rising COVID case numbers have led to large numbers self-isolating and being unable to go to work. This has particularly affected industries where staff are unable to work from home. A large fire has severely damaged the Houses of Parliament in the South African city of Cape Town. Video footage showed a plume of black smoke filling the sky, with huge flames coming out of the roof of the building. President Cyril Ramaphosa visited the scene and called it a terrible and devastating event. A 51-year-old man was being held and questioned by the authorities, police said. The blaze, which began shortly after 6 o'clock local time, came the day after Archbishop Desmond Tutu's state funeral at St George's Cathedral near Parliament. Ramaphosa said the news of the fire was a terrible setback to what we were basking in yesterday, and added that Archbishop Tutu would have also been devastated. He said the building's sprinkler system had not functioned properly and praised firefighters for responding to the fire in minutes. Dozens of firefighters battled the flames. Officials later said that the entire parliamentary complex was severely damaged. Denmark's government has announced a goal to make domestic flights fossil fuel free by 2030. In her New Year's address, Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen said she wanted to make flying green. However, she acknowledged that solutions to reach her target were not yet in place. Denmark is aiming for a 70% cut in overall carbon emissions by 2030 compared to 1990 levels. To travel is to live, and therefore we fly, said Ms Frederiksen, announcing her plan. When other countries in the world are too slow, then Denmark must take the lead and raise the bar even more, she said. Prince Andrew's bid to block the continuation of a lawsuit by a woman who says he sexually assaulted her when she was 17 on the grounds that she no longer lives in the US has been rejected by a judge. Federal Judge Lewis A. Kaplan told the Duke of York's lawyers in a written order that they must hand over documents on the schedule that has been set in the suit brought by Virginia Giuffre. Giuffre alleges that she was abused by the prince multiple times in 2001 while she was being sexually assaulted by financier Jeffrey Epstein. And finally, the superstar footballer Lionel Messi is one of 4 Paris Saint-Germain players to test positive for COVID-19. The Argentinian forward and teammates Juan Bernat, Nathan Pitamazala and Sergio Rico were confirmed to have COVID a day before PSG's French Cup tie against 4th-tier side Vannes. The quartet are said to be isolating. PSG boss Mauricio Pochettino said that Messi remained in Argentina, where he spent the winter break, and would not travel until testing negative. During a pre-match news conference on Sunday, Pochettino said he could not put a date on Messi's return. PSG's first league game of 2022 after their winter break is against Lyon on Sunday, January the 9th. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Please go to the petition and sign it. tinyurl.com/Stop Sir Blair. Let's make this as big as the great anti-war demonstration on February 15th, 2003. If you were on that demonstration and you're still alive, then sign it. If your children are now old enough to sign, get them to sign it. If you know now what you didn't know back then sign it. Let's get 1 million signatures to ask the Queen to turn again away from this course of action. The poll's going well. Should Tony Blair be A, knighted, B, indicted? 3,000 people have voted so far. You can vote on my Twitter feed, on my YouTube channel, on my Telegram channel. Now, regular viewers and listeners will know that we have championed from the beginning the case of poor Harry Dunn, the young boy that was mown down on his bicycle by an American CIA official, as it turned out, driving on the wrong side of the road, having turned out of a British military base, which was actually cover for American military and intelligence activities. The culprit, the guilty party, fled the coup with the assistance of officials in the British Foreign Office. Just think about that. She was advised by the FCO to get out of the country just as quickly as possible. Since when, the family of poor Harry have been struggling valiantly for justice and closure on this case, and they have had from the beginning the assistance of positively the best advocate of any such campaign I have ever come across. He is Radd Seiger, and he joins me again now. Radd, a good new year to you. I hope very much it's a successful one for Harry's family. Perhaps you could bring us up to date, because there's been a lot of false starts over the last couple of months.
George, good evening. Happy New Year, and Happy New Year to all your listeners and viewers.
Thank you.
Look, it is, as you say, a remarkable case, a remarkable story, but at its heart, as you've just described, is a broken-hearted family who lost really a child. Harry was 19. He lived about 300 yards up the road from me, and the base that you talk about is about 2 miles over my right shoulder. And that's what this is really about. It's about a broken-hearted family. But, you know, the night that they lost him, George, I know you're a parent, I'm a parent. We can only imagine what they went through at hospital that night when the doctors told them that Harry didn't make it. They were on the floor. But a few weeks later, the United States government decided to put on its size 12 boots and kick them in the stomach whilst they were going through their, through their pain. And that was not acceptable to any of us in our community. It wasn't acceptable to me. And thank goodness that you and colleagues in the media put your arms around us and gave us this platform to tell Harry's story. Because as far as I'm concerned, although there's lots of complexities in the case, you do not get to do this sort of thing and just walk away. And that's what the United States government chose to do. And I'm guessing that if you and I hadn't started a bit of a fuss, they would have quite happily allowed the situation to endure. And look, it's just very emotional tonight, because as we turn this new year, we've finally been told, we were told just before Christmas, that our campaign has met its first objective, and Mrs. Tsoukalis will be facing the British justice system on the 18th of January at 2 p.m. at Westminster Magistrates Court, where she will be making her first appearance. So I think in a nutshell, that's where we're up to. The parents have had civil justice, and I heard you were just talking about Virginia Giuffre's case and the sex trafficking victims. Harry's parents have already had their civil justice, but the number one objective in our campaign was to ensure that criminal justice was done, and that is now what is going to happen.
Well, will she be appearing in person?
George, it's a very good question. It's our understanding that she will be appearing, she will make at least her first appearance remotely from Virginia. But that's a question that we don't fully know the answer to. And that, of course, is in the hands of the Crown Prosecution Service, whose job it is to prosecute the right person for the right offense. George, I remember being in that very studio with you a few weeks after Harry died, where I told you that this situation was going to be reversed and that she was going to face our justice system. I'm a little less concerned about how that happens, because that's not within my gift. I represent victims of a crime. I'm not the prosecutor. And so as far as we're concerned, the moment that she makes that first appearance, we will have achieved our first objective. But I think the intention is that she appears remotely. I think that's what's been discussed publicly throughout last year between the two governments. And look, frankly, in the middle of a pandemic, it seems to the family, at least, that if she does appear remotely, that's a perfectly reasonable way forward.
Well, it might be something that Julian Assange's lawyers might try in relation to the pickle that they find themselves in. But I presume that she's going to plead guilty because she has acknowledged her crime already. So if found guilty, what power would this British court have when the person they're sentencing is in Virginia?
Again, a very good question that I don't think I can answer fully at this point. And again, I think it's important to remind everybody this evening that there are now live criminal proceedings. This lady is entitled to a fair hearing. That's what we stand for in the British courts. We do things, I think, here slightly better than they do in America, where there is lots of this sort of talk in the States before hearings. Here, I think we have to take the sensible approach. She is guilty of nothing yet, George. As you say, she's admitted her culpability, I think, shortly after the crash. But at the moment, she's charged with causing death by dangerous driving. And she has certainly not admitted her guilt to that. So I think, she will have legal advice, and I don't know what she will do at that first hearing, but I just want to encourage everybody, now that we've reached the stage, to show the world that this is the safest legal system in the world. We don't condemn anybody, and we give people that space and time to have a fair hearing. So I'm afraid I can't then go on to speculate if she is convicted of anything and then sentenced to anything, what might happen. But look, what I know for sure, George, speaking in general terms, is that it is open to the two governments to enter into a bespoke agreement. So let's just say if I were convicted, if I'm an American, I'm convicted of a crime here, but I'm then sent back to the United States, the governments can enter into a bespoke agreement whereby I would serve that sentence in the United States, whatever it is. So that is certainly open to the authorities to do. And as far as we're concerned, whatever, if she is sentenced to anything, and it's a big if, we are content that she would serve that in the United States.
And remind us finally, Radd, of the date of the hearing.
It's on the 18th of January, so 2 weeks from this Tuesday, 2 p.m. GMT at Westminster Magistrates Court in London.
Well, please pass our very best wishes on to Harry's family and, of course, to you for fighting this noble fight that you have now for so long. Radd Seiger, thank you very much indeed. Should Tony Blair be A, knighted? 6%. B, indicted? 94%. That's on Twitter. On YouTube, 5% say knighted, 95% say indicted. And on Telegram, good old Telegram, 1% say knighted, 99% say indicted. You've still got time to vote on that. Sign the petition now to stop the knighting of Tony Blair. tinyurl.com/stop Sir Blair. Let me read some social media. Paul Kitching says, this man, Tony Blair, his crimes are as wicked as any of those that were judged at Nuremberg. To award this man the highest honour is to belittle that judgment and to shame those who bestow it. I'm afraid I'm with Paul on that. Strong words, but I'm with Paul. DJ says the 6% who say he should be knighted, seriously, the guy deserves an indictment from The Hague. As an old Scottish friend told me, your ass is out the window. Attila Desix says Iraq was George Bush's war. Blair just went along with it. Don't make me laugh. Call in, actually, yeah. Come on, Attila, are you hard enough? Give me a phone and we'll test that hypothesis, shall we? RK70 says, hard to believe anyone with a sane mind would answer knighted here. The man told this nation to go to war over a lie. And how many died or were displaced? Lock him up. And Jim Connolly says, let's not airbrush from history his work on the Good Friday Agreement. Right, Jim. Right. And Ben Lewis says, knighted, proudly. Jim Dodo, let's not confuse honour with an honour. Tony Blair has only one of these. And Tootsie says, this demon makes Saddam Hussein look like a saint. Even the Iraqis who hated him are nostalgic for the old days. How Cherie has stuck by his side all these years is beyond me. I don't know what she first saw in the multi-millionaire Sir Anthony Blair, former Prime Minister of Britain. And Monsieur says that Blair is not fit to walk the same streets as the brave people he sent in. And Ogoto says there's probably a few more options you could add, but it's a family-friendly feed. Indeed, it is. And Dave says a Prime Minister should not have an automatic right to a knighthood or a lordship. And neither do they, Dave. There is no automatic right to a knighthood or a peerage. And John Wayne says 100 years from now, they'll be chucking Blair's statue in the Thames. In 100 minutes, if they put such a statue up. And Legsby says, indicted, but I would settle for hung, drawn and quartered. CD London says, definitely knighted. Ridding the UK Labour of scum is a knighthood in anyone's book. What does that actually mean, CD? Why not give us a call and explain? And Emil says it's a truly terrible choice. That odious man has caused widespread pain, destruction, terror and grief. He's no better than Osama bin Laden. Well, he killed far more people than Osama bin Laden. Think about it. Far, infinitely more people than Osama bin Laden. And John Kay says maybe Her Majesty meant Lionel Blair, not the warmonger Tony. I don't care how Her Majesty gets out of this. She could claim it was all an aberration. She'd had a bad night. Somebody forged her name on the papers, whatever. Just walk it back, ma'am. Now, in 1977, Steve Wozniak was one of two people who legally registered a now famous company. What was it called? A, Apple, B, Microsoft, C, Tasty Foam. I'd go for Tasty Foam myself, coming up after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
You know, I had that George Galloway back in here the other day. Well, I'll tell you what, talk about the knowledge. By the time he got out, I had a first-class degree.
We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
It's for you, sir. Where's the cheese pizza, Robinson? Come on, what are the public paying you for? Oh, and get another virgin colada while you're there. There's a good chap. Oh, who's ringing the old burner phone? Hello? How did you get this number, Ghislaine? No, that's impossible. I can't possibly fly to New York. Why? Our mummy's grounded me. Oh, yes. Starting to cut off my allowance, you know. Yes, I know it comes from the public, but she holds the strings. Oh, I've got to go. My pizza will be here any minute. I'm not sweating, you're sweating. Ghislaine, don't call again. Robinson? Sir. Come here with that moist towelette. It's getting a bit hot for my liking.
George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
The company was not Tasty Foam, but Apple Wozniak. That was quite a good business move. Now, in this last period, many people have not set eyes on their doctor, myself amongst them. It's easy enough to see the doctor's receptionist, but then she acts as if she's guarding Stalag 19 quite often. But we, the audience of Moats, have been able to see a doctor every single week, and not just any doctor, but our own Moats medic and brilliant guide through the coronavirus pandemic, Dr. Ranjeet Brar, who comes back in the new year. Now, Dr. Ranjeet, Happy New Year to you. Welcome back.
Happy New Year, George. Lovely to speak to you.
Now, tell me, I predicted here, I feel quite pleased that I did, pleased that it has worked out the way that it seems to be working out, namely that the Omicron, based on the South African experience, would travel far, but would not kill or hospitalize anything like the number of people that previous variants of the virus have done. So far, that prediction has been vindicated, at least on the face of it. Where do you stand on that?
I think that assessment is entirely accurate, George. In terms of travelling far, unquestionably, we've seen a spike, massive spike in positive tests. If you look at the world figures, we had a single day on the 30th of December where we had 2 million people test positive. That was a first. In the UK, on the 30th of December, we had 228,000 people test positive. So a huge spike that we've not seen before in terms of positive tests. But of course, the immune landscape, certainly in countries which have access to vaccination, is totally changed. And effectively, what we thought was very dangerous and incorrect at the beginning of the pandemic, which was this strategy of herd immunity, protect the economy, and if a few people die, old people die, so be it, i.e. let it run rampant through the population. That was very damaging then. But now, in as much as the oldest, most vulnerable portion of the population who experienced the lion's share, 85% of the mortality and morbidity from coronavirus, have essentially been overwhelmingly protected by vaccination, or those people who haven't had vaccination, a very large percentage of them have had the coronavirus and were the less vulnerable. So actually, you're quite right. There have been far fewer hospitalizations and far fewer deaths. Now, there are an increasing number of people in hospital with coronavirus now, as there would be if we think that more than 2 million people, 1 in 25 of the population, have coronavirus. Of course, there are going to be some of those in hospital. But what we're seeing, myself and my colleagues, some of our wards are in fact so affected that on the basis that we don't want it to spread, it's deeply affecting our work. But we're not seeing those patients, those vulnerable comorbid patients who were so vulnerable during the first and second waves. We're not seeing them succumb in the same way. Very many of them are testing positive and being asymptomatic. So that what was very, again, profoundly wrong, talking about everyone dying with coronavirus rather than of it at the beginning of the pandemic, essentially we're getting to that point now. By excess mortality, we don't seem to be in a period of excess mortality at the moment. If we look at the true global figure for the number of people who are likely to have died as a result of coronavirus during the last 2 years, it's hard to estimate those figures, but it's, you're probably talking around 15 to 20 million people. So a very substantial number of people. Right now, we are not seeing excess mortality, George.
That was my second question to you. What is the excess mortality? And I'm happy to hear that it doesn't seem to exist in the way that it did early in the pandemic, when it was very clear that we were suffering very much excess mortality. That rules out for the lockdowns then, doesn't it?
To my mind, yes. I thought, I've had a lot of respect for independent SAGE initially. It does seem to me that as epidemiologists, they're to an extent become almost obsessed by the numbers and the fact that to stop coronavirus spreading, we should lock down. I think we're in a very different situation now. China was one of the few countries who successfully implemented the zero COVID strategy, who really used testing to isolate people with coronavirus from the population and protect the overwhelming, mass of the population from getting coronavirus. We can't do that now. If 2 million people in the country have coronavirus, the vast majority of people who want to be vaccinated have been vaccinated, then essentially we're at a stage where actually we must ask ourselves in the near future, what is the further utility of testing? At the moment, we're kind of using it to isolate people, but not very seriously. We're not really isolating the people from 2 million of the population. They're not fully isolating. They're being off work for a little while, but they're continuing essentially in many respects to have contact, and the virus is continuing to circulate. We've reached that stage where it has become endemic. Endemic, but far less harmful. And whereas before I was absolutely against equating this to flu, now with the new landscape, at least a 90% reduction in mortality. So it starts to approximate something much more like the flu. And over the coming months, I have no doubt that immediately after Christmas and the New Year, we'll see even higher numbers. We will see problems with, staff having to isolate because they've tested positive, though they're not necessarily sick. That affects the running of the NHS. Those are real problems. Workforce problems are real. But in terms of the sickness and death, we have to ask ourselves, at what stage do we actually stop testing? Do we stop restricting society at all because of the circulation of coronavirus? And I think that is the question which is going to dominate the next couple of months. Ultimately, I think not leading to lockdown, but rather leading to restriction of a lifting and restrictions. But that's slightly contradictory to some of the recent legislation, of course, that was passed by the government.
People unfortunate enough to be watching and listening from Scotland and Wales know, of course, that they have governments, if you can call them governments, in place that are determined to stick to the old script, not least to be different from the script being followed in Whitehall and Westminster. But maybe that's for another day. We're running out of testing equipment. As far as I know, right at this moment, it's practically impossible to get a test at the minute. So I'm not sure how much longer this regime of testing everyone will continue, not least because when told to isolate, even if not sick, the kind of problems in the labour market that are going to be caused is going to be more harmful than these people continuing their life as usual, don't you think?
I do. I mean, the whole purpose of testing initially was to accurately, find out exactly who had the virus and isolate them from the community. We totally failed to do that. I think, the Scottish and Welsh legislature, learnt the damaging effects of the delayed decision-making when there was no immunity, essentially, in the population, and coronavirus was spreading like wildfire through the population, precisely the time when, herd immunity, protecting the economy, protecting the profits of the corporate elite was uppermost in the minds of the Conservative Party. And, I think that sooner or later, the Conservative administration, Boris Johnson, will pay a price for that. And, the fact that he flouted his own restrictions, all of the scandal around the Partygate really just is indicative of their attitude that there's one rule for the herd, another rule for themselves, the ruling class, and the extremely rich. So that, I think, will come back to bite Boris. I think the other legislatures are still thinking that they will get extra brownie points for acting early, but actually the situation on the ground has totally changed. You can actually feel when people now have a positive diagnosis, they're not worried for their health. They're not worried for their loved one's health. They say, "Oh, I hope you're okay," but overwhelmingly, people are. The number of people who are in ITU is now very small. People are spending much less time in hospital if they're having to go to hospital with coronavirus. They're being discharged and recovering. So, I think the situation's totally changed. We are coming out of the pandemic. The numbers we've had are probably far in excess of the recognised numbers, but that's largely due to the incredible wave that there was in South Asia, still largely unrecognised, probably as many as 4 million people, George, died in India alone. But that was then. This is now. The pandemic is 2 years down the line. We failed to isolate and control it because that wasn't the primary concern of our governments. But now, having spread through the population and thankfully having found not one but many vaccines, the main issue still remaining for the end of the pandemic globally is to make sure that vaccination is actually distributed to those countries who need it most. And really the theme that we've seen coming to light throughout this period has been the dichotomy, the different interests between a global corporate elite who want to put their profits first at all time, as epitomised by those who refuse to waive their property rights over the vaccination and refuse to give recognition to the first vaccines that were developed, the Sputnik vaccine, of course, the Chinese Sinovac vaccine, and therefore have interfered actually with the global response. They haven't treated it primarily as a health problem. They've treated it as an economic and power problem. They've used actually, coronavirus and access to funds and access to vaccination to leverage their power and control of governments. So you think of Venezuela, think of Cuba, who were able to develop their own vaccination, of course. But this, we've seen essentially the normal power politics play out through the spectrum of coronavirus. I think our own working people are heartily fed up of it. They're fed up of the arrogant attitude of government, and they're desperate and they're crying out really for change. And I think that's epitomised, as you were talking about, by the changes in the polls that we're seeing. But I think you're right to say that essentially there's been no different thinking, there's been no different plan coming from the Labour government. There's certainly been no real protection of the NHS. We've seen a radical switch towards privatisation of the NHS. That's been ratcheted up, that whole agenda throughout this pandemic. And the Labour government have chimed in with that, despite raising their voice apparently against takeover of US health companies in a half-hearted way. There's no real different agenda. And really what this has shown is that, above all, Operation Cygnus back in 2016 predicted entirely the NHS would fall over, that we wouldn't be able to see our GPs, as you're saying, that we wouldn't have access to health services. And that is actually being used to further put pressure, these record waiting lists, unprecedented waiting lists, 5, 6, 7, expected to become 13 million people trying to access care. All of that's being used to lever people away from the NHS into the corporate sector, into private healthcare. And actually the bed base, which has been so eroded, will remain eroded. There's no serious political agenda on either side of the House to change that, to reverse the direction, to really institute a proper national health service that works for the people. It shouldn't be a question of can we treat coronavirus or people's other sicknesses. We should be able to treat all the illness of all our people. There shouldn't be a dichotomy between the economy and the health of the people. You can't have one without the other. And this is what we desperately need, George.
Well, now that Blair is clearly back in charge of Labour politics, I guess it's back to the future in any case for them, leaving a lot of ground clear for those with a radically different point of view. Dr. Ranjeet, excellent prescription and prognosis for 2022. Thank you, as always, for joining us. Should Tony Blair be A, knighted, or B, indicted? That's what I want to know. Now look, Simon, our sound man, is also our podcast man. And he's got some even better news for us, I hope. Simon, can you hear me?
I can hear you, George. Can you hear me?
I can. I hope the world can. How's the podcast going?
Well, hello, podcast listeners, and hello from the mothership here at HQ at the Mother of All Talk Shows. Well, what a happy new year it's been for us here, and a happy new year as well to our listeners, because you have made our podcast a resounding success. We finished 2021 with a strong boost. 31% our listenership jumped in December. Wow. New subscribers from Spotify, Apple Podcasts, George. We've got Deezer, Google Podcasts. Gaetana in India, we're one of the top podcasts on that platform. Can you believe it? And we're now in the podcast index. You want to find us? We are available to find if you search for us. Now, George, since we last spoke, got new countries that have joined us. We've got Peru, Bulgaria, Ethiopia, Luxembourg and the Côte d'Ivoire have joined us and have begun to chart highly in all of those. We're now charting in the Netherlands. I'm sure your lovely wife Gayatri will be pleased. That's including the other 27 countries that we're currently charting in. And that's from here right now in the Moats HQ, in the GB, all the way to Hong Kong and Australia and beyond. Thank you to our new American listeners. You remember what we were saying? We were looking for people in Vermont, Alaska and Hawaii. Well, thank you very much, friends in the US. You have heard at our call. You've joined us in being subscribers to the podcast. That means we've only got the states of West Virginia, Maine and Mississippi to join us before we've got all stars and stripes in the red, white and blue.
West Virginia, Maine and Mississippi. If you're listening or watching in the United States and you know anybody in those rather populous states, please spread the word. If that's the last 3 states in the Union not yet turned on to the podcast, it's about time they were. Simon, this was all just a twinkle in your eye at the beginning. Can you, guesstimate how many people have listened to our podcast since we began it?
Well, when we first started this little idea, I remember you saying in the first meeting we ever had for Moats, it's radio with pictures. And look at me now, I'm looking into a picture. I'm so used to radio, I'm just speaking directly into a microphone. But this is the future. This is where we're moving to. You will see more and more radio broadcasts on our television screens and more on our television screens looking and sounding like a radio broadcast. But the next step in the evolution of technology, as we can see in America, nearly every single household in America listens to at least 4 or 5 podcasts a week. So the opportunities are endless for small media to be listened to be enjoyed on the go, wherever you are, anywhere in the world, as long as you've got a data signal on your mobile phone. And that's where we should be. That's where we deserve to be. The mainstream media can't touch us when we're a podcast. It's free speech. It's free form, exactly how it should be. And that's where we need to be. And that's where we are. We're reaching people all over the world.
That's exactly what I was going to ask you. Big algorithm can't interfere with that, can he?
No, it's our intellectual property, George. We post, you listen.
Fantastic. Okay, sum up, how do people do so? If, like me, I've never listened to a podcast. So imagine people like me, tell me, give me an idiot's guide to how you get your hands on a podcast.
Do you listen to music online?
Yes.
Yes or no?
Yes.
Do you listen on Apple or Spotify? Well, so close, so
I
far.
listen on YouTube.
If you listen on YouTube, well, maybe we should put our podcast on YouTube. Maybe that's something that we should look into. It's certainly something that I can do my end. But if you're somebody that goes online and wants to see media that you don't see on a TV screen, you tune into your radio. Now, what if you don't have time to tune into your radio? You look at your phone. If you have access to Facebook, you have access to a podcast. If you have access to Instagram, look at our Monologue on Instagram Live. Then if you go to the @Moats TV Instagram, there is a link to our podcast. Go on your Twitter, George, @George Galloway. There will be a link to your podcast.
Okay.
It is as easy as that. It's one click, one subscribe, one listen. The show is yours.
Simon, you're a genius. Thank you very much. Oh, to be young again, I understand half of that. Should Tony Blair be A, knighted, B, indicted? You've not got long left to vote on that, but thousands of you have done. Make sure you get your vote in. Now, here's an amazing question. In 1961, the world's longest strike ended, and Danish barbers once more took up their scissors. How long did the strike last? A, 2 years, B, 33 years, C, 10 years. Answer after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
You know, and it's a very, thank you for, you know, I'm a big fan of your show, Gigi. Great debate, great. And I'm Scottish. I'm very passionate about what's happening there, you know. I had a great mom. She was Scottish, Mary McLeod. She taught me well. She taught me well at everything, including golf. I love Scotland, and I love the Scottish food. It's great food. I said to Melania, you know, haggis, look at that. What's more Scottish than that? Me. I am that haggis. She said, what, thin-skinned and full of crap?
Sputnik has been launched to give you a closer look at everything happening in the world.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
There is a staggering 33 years. How could a strike last 33 years? And how could there have been any barbers left by the end of it to take up their scissors? I need further and better particulars on this. It sounds a bit like an early April Fool to me. Get your vote in on the Blair situation, which is really flying, maybe a record actually. And please sign the petition. Let's get it to 1 million signatories over the next week or so. It's tinyurl.com/Stop Sir Blair. Now, things ain't what they used to be. Video didn't kill the radio star. In fact, video itself went out of business. But I'm increasingly sure, although my next guest will not thank me, I'm sure, for saying so, that the moment has passed from the big screen to the small screen. Like many of you, through the pandemic and over the Christmas New Year hiatus, I have gorged myself on some of the most fabulous, fantastic, huge production values, great acting talent on television. It never occurred to me once, even if I could have, with 5 young children, it never occurred to me to go to the pictures, as we say, where I come from, go to the cinema, because the cinema is in my television. I can watch Amazon, I can watch Netflix, and I'm going to see product that is better, in my view, better written, better acted, better photographed than anything that I'm going to see in the cinema. And I'm not going to get coronavirus. I won't have to sit next to a stranger. Let's see if my next guest agrees. He's Michael McCaffrey. He's the doyen of film critics. He's a regular guest of ours because I admire his stuff so much. So let me take his expert opinion. Michael McCaffrey, Happy New Year and welcome back on the mother of all talk shows.
Happy New Year to you, George. Thank you for having me on, sir. And let me start by just saying, how dare you? How dare you slander cinema like that, sir? You are out of line. Unbelievable.
Okay, make the case.
I'm kidding. You're exactly right. So this year in particular, I think you're entirely right that cinema has lost its fastball. So in 2020, of course, cinemas were closed for the most part, and people just watch TV. And now films are becoming events, and the only type of movie that people will actually go to the cinema to see are those big events. So Spider-Man, the new Spider-Man movie, is a perfect example that here's something that is going to be enhanced by going to the theater to see on a big screen. Whereas all the movies, that we've loved through the years, whether it be Scorsese films or Tarantino films, those movies are disappearing and they're migrating towards, you can just watch them at home. So for example, Spielberg had West Side Story come out this year. Why he made that movie, I have no idea. There was already a perfectly fine West Side Story from 1961, but he makes the movie and nobody goes to see it. And nobody goes to see it because, first of all, older people are going to be the audience for that, and they're not going to want to expose themselves to coronavirus. Secondly, they can wait 45 days, and that movie is going to be available in their home to rent through Amazon Prime or on Apple TV or on Netflix. And in the old days, it used to be you had to wait 90 days or 120 days before you could see those movies. So now there's no incentive to risk going to the movies. Plus, there's just not very many good movies that come out. And this year in particular was pretty atrocious across the board in terms of quality. And for a cinephile like me, that's very unnerving because there is nothing like seeing a film in the theater. It used to be that theaters had 35 millimeter projectors and it would look different. The sound was amazing. And now every theater has digital projectors, which flattens the visuals, flattens the sound. And you're just seeing things bigger. You're not seeing them better. And of course, televisions at home, people have great TVs and they have great sound systems. You don't have to deal with the general public, right, who are checking their phones or making noise, et cetera, et cetera. You can pause it if you need to go to the bathroom or you want to get something to eat, you won't miss anything. So unfortunately, George, as always, you are correct. Cinema it's in a spiral now. I don't know if it's a death spiral, but it sure feels like it. And it's very unfortunate for someone like me who absolutely loves movies and lives for them. So.
Well, look, the last film I went to see was James Bond, and now they've murdered James Bond, and God knows what aberration they're going to conjure forth in his place. He can't be 007, he's been killed. It'll be, we're told, a non-binary or a woman identifying as a man or the other way around, or one of a multitude of possibilities, but I feel that franchise will begin to spiral also. I take your point about West Side Story. I am in the catchment audience for that, but I'm waiting to watch it on my rather big television screen with rather good sound system. You can imagine what my babysitting bill would be with 5 young children. It's just not worth my while going to see it at the cinema. But at the same time, the television is getting much better. It's not just that the movies are getting less attractive. It's that, I mean, I, for example, watched the whole of the Money Heist. If you'd said to me, come out to the cinema and see a Spanish heist movie, I would never in a million years have done it. But I did it on Netflix, and artistically, in every sense, it is a work of high art. If anybody out there still hasn't seen it, they really are missing something. So the best talent is migrating, isn't it, to the television, and that's got to be to Hollywood's disadvantage.
Well, without question, the talent has already migrated to television. There's no longer, for actors in particular, there used to be a stigma that you were a TV actor as opposed to a movie actor. And that's just simply not the case and hasn't been for quite some time. But directors moving to streaming services is another big thing, because for a director, number one, you can get more control over your product. You're not going to be hectored by studio bosses wanting to cut this or add that and this and that. You're going to have more control. And secondly, if you're doing a series, let's say it's a 10 episode series, that's 10 hours that you have to tell that story.
Yeah.
As opposed to in a feature film, you're lucky.
1 hour, 20 minutes. Yeah.
And so just from a creative standpoint, it gives you so much more to work with. And you can go so much deeper into the story, into the complexity of the characters and things like that, which in film you just can't. And of course, the odd thing about that is that as audiences become less tolerant, as their attention spans diminish, they can tolerate a 10 episode show, which is 10 hours, but they can't tolerate a 2-hour movie, right? But so that's the benefit for creatives going to television. And the studios understand this and they're doing it. Disney's the perfect example. So Disney has all these big, Marvel superhero movies that they throw out there and generally make good money. But they transitioned to television too. So now they have these TV shows that you have to watch to sort of keep up with the storylines in the movies. And they're doing it with Star Wars as well. So they have the new show, The Book of Boba Fett just started. And so Star Wars fans who are thirsty for any Star Wars stuff can watch this show. And so they understand that the people, their viewing habits are changing radically and very quickly. And of course, COVID had a lot to do with it. And COVID seems more like the end than the beginning of that shift. It feels like people just aren't going to go back to the cinema to see things because, you can binge watch a show, you can not watch, if it comes out every week, you can wait till the end and watch it all at once. And you just don't have that sort of opportunity with cinema. And to me, it's disappointing because there is really nothing like, say, a Scorsese film. Seeing Goodfellas in the cinema is just one of those experiences where you're like, oh my goodness, this guy just spent 2 hours, 20 minutes blowing my mind. And, the visuals of it. But again, like I said, even visually, things are not as good in the cinema as they used to be. And that's because all the big chains just want to save money. They don't want to use 35 millimeter projectors. They use digital. Everything gets sort of washed out. And it's like watching TV.
An even bigger TV, yeah. I mean, no, that's a good example you give. Now, you see, in the Money Heist, I have watched now, it must be, I don't know how many episodes I've watched, but we're talking scores of hours. I have developed an intense interest in the characters. I'll be bereft when it finishes and that I won't see them again. Ditto Goodfellas. You see, I'd have liked to watch 10 hours of Goodfellas rather than 2 hours. Spread out. The wife and I watch maybe 1, maybe 2 episodes of something per night. And we're looking forward to the next night to watch another 1 or 2 episodes. I would have liked to have done that with Goodfellas, but that form does not allow that.
That's true. And, that would be great to see. It's almost like, comparing a painter and a collage artist. They're two different things. So Scorsese is making this 2-hour compelling drama. And, if he were to do that in television, that would be, if you're doing multiple seasons, that could be 50 or 60 hours of entertainment that he could get into that sort of stuff. So that is really true. And I think everybody I speak to in the industry understands this. They understand that this shift is not going to go back, that people, and the other interesting thing about it is people can work more if you work in television like that, because they're not shooting like pilot season in the spring. Things come out all the time, and you can work multiple, you have to in many cases work multiple series over the course of a year in order to make a living. And you know, that just, and plus there's the audience craving for content. So, and we have Amazon Prime, we have Netflix, we have HBO Max, we have, you know, Apple TV Plus. All of these streaming services are just craving content because the audience just devours this stuff. They just devour it. And they're throwing money left and right at people to give them stuff to satiate their audience.
Well, you and I need to get together and offer them some content. But finally, is it the end for the cigar-chomping, big studio boss, the tyrannical rule of the, or reign rather, of the studios? That's over now, yeah?
Oh, I would say that will never go away. That's just the function of the type of people that Hollywood attracts. And so what you're seeing, Disney, again, a perfect example, they dominate the box office. I think Disney has, you know, like 60% of the domestic box office. But now with Disney Plus, they dominate television as well. And so Netflix is the same way. So you're just getting a different type of cigar chomping studio boss. This sort of studio boss is now demanding, you know, diversity and inclusion and sort of pushing a woke agenda, things like that. But they're just as domineering and they're just as sort of depraved as always. They just cover it up a little bit.
Well, I was hoping you were going to say there'd be no more Harvey Weinsteins, but from what you say, they've just slimmed down a little.
Yeah, they've lost weight and they're, I think, just better at what they do. Those people still exist, trust me.
Is the dough the same, the money the same? Do you get the same being a big actor on Netflix, a big director on Netflix, as you would have got as a cinema actor, director?
It's all about your power and your leverage. If you are somebody who has some swagger to you, you're going to get just as much money. Yeah, and you're going to have just as much control, and you can get multiple projects that you aren't directly, that you're not directing, but maybe you're producing and things like that. So that's why you see, you know, even Christopher Nolan, who was adamant about never wanting to go to a streaming service. He was all about cinema. Well, he's going to Netflix because they threw him a bunch of money and said, you can do whatever you want. And he said, great, that's what I'm looking for. And that's going to happen with everybody. And, you know, Scorsese's done it. Spielberg has done it. All these people who are so adamant about maintaining the cinematic experience, they're going there because, yeah, the money is just as good and the control is even better. And you know, as in cinema, there's not that opportunity. Spielberg, a perfect example. Ridley Scott's another example of this great director who, he had 2 movies come out this year and they've done nothing, you know, and one of them was pretty good. And it did nothing. It was a $100 million budget. It was The Last Duel. It's a film I enjoyed. It's made $30 million. Oof. And the opportunity for those guys is going away, where the studios are not going to bankroll that sort of thing. But you can control it in a streaming setting. So that it can sit there and you get, you can see how many people are watching it, you can see how many people join and things like that. So I think that's just the way of the future.
Where did it all go right? Thank you very much indeed, Michael, for joining us. I wish you the very best of years, and I hope that we get to talk many, many times in the course of this year about moving pictures wherever, however you consume them and watch them. The poll has closed. A record number of people have voted. Breaking news on the petition. It has reached 300,000 signatures in the last few seconds. 301,000. Let's get it to 1 million. We're 1/3 nearly of the way there. Let's get it up to 1 million. 4,600 of you voted in the poll, and I'm afraid that Tony Blair has been indicted by our audience. That is for sure. Let's get the news, shall we, with Jamie Lowe.
Radio Sputnik News.
Face masks are to be worn in classrooms in England's secondary schools to reduce the spread of the Omicron variant. The government has announced the temporary reintroduction of face coverings aims to address concerns about schools remaining open for face-to-face learning this coming term. However, 6 school staff unions have issued a demand for urgent action to limit the spread of the virus. They warned national exams would be put at risk without further measures. They also called for air cleaning units, financial support for absence cover, help with on-site testing and a relaxation of the Ofsted inspection regime. Schools across the UK are reopening after the Christmas break over the next week, with pupils being asked to take part in on-site COVID testing. Until now, England was one of the only 4 UK nations where face masks were not recommended for pupils in classrooms. Teachers will not have to wear them under the new guidelines. 20 Conservative MPs and peers have called on the Prime Minister to tackle the spiralling cost of living. 5 ex-ministers are among those who have written to the Sunday Telegraph newspaper arguing for a cut in environmental levies and the removal of energy taxes. Their call follows big increases in wholesale gas prices. Experts say average bills could hit £2,000 in 2022. The government says it is meeting suppliers and the regulator regularly to work out how to help consumers. Health Minister Edward Argar said there were a range of measures to help those who feel the squeeze with particular household bills, adding that the economy was bouncing back. The letter to the Telegraph has been organised by the right-wing Net Zero Scrutiny Group of Conservatives, which keeps an eye on the potential consequences of the government's environmental commitments. British government ministers have been tasked with developing robust contingency plans for workplace absences, as the government warned rising cases could see up to a quarter of staff off work. Public sector leaders have been asked to prepare for worst-case scenarios of 10, 20 and 25% absence rates, the Cabinet Office said. The UK has seen record numbers of daily cases over the festive period. Transport, the NHS and schools have already seen the effect of absences. Rising COVID case numbers have led to large numbers self-isolating and being unable to go to work. This has particularly affected industries where staff are unable to work from home. A large fire has severely damaged the Houses of Parliament in the South African city of Cape Town. Video footage showed a plume of black smoke filling the sky, with huge flames coming out of the roof of the building. President Cyril Ramaphosa visited the scene and called it a terrible and devastating event. A 51-year-old man was being held and questioned by the authorities, police said. The blaze, which began shortly after 6 o'clock local time, came the day after Archbishop Desmond Tutu's state funeral at St George's Cathedral near Parliament. Ramaphosa said the news of the fire was a terrible setback to what we were basking in yesterday, and added that Archbishop Tutu would have also been devastated. He said the building's sprinkler system had not functioned properly and praised firefighters for responding to the fire in minutes. Dozens of firefighters battled the flames. Officials later said that the entire parliamentary complex was severely damaged. Denmark's government has announced a goal to make domestic flights fossil fuel free by 2030. In her New Year's address, Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen said she wanted to make flying green. However, she acknowledged that solutions to reach her target were not yet in place. Denmark is aiming for a 70% cut in overall carbon emissions by 2030 compared to 1990 levels. To travel is to live, and therefore we fly, said Ms Frederiksen, announcing her plan. When other countries in the world are too slow, then Denmark must take the lead and raise the bar even more, she said. Prince Andrew's bid to block the continuation of a lawsuit by a woman who says he sexually assaulted her when she was 17 on the grounds that she no longer lives in the US has been rejected by a judge. Federal Judge Lewis A. Kaplan told the Duke of York's lawyers in a written order that they must hand over documents on the schedule that has been set in the suit brought by Virginia Giuffre. Giuffre alleges that she was abused by the prince multiple times in 2001 while she was being sexually assaulted by financier Jeffrey Epstein. And finally, the superstar footballer Lionel Messi is one of 4 Paris Saint-Germain players to test positive for COVID-19. The Argentinian forward and teammates Juan Bernat, Nathan Pitamazala and Sergio Rico were confirmed to have COVID a day before PSG's French Cup tie against 4th-tier side Vannes. The quartet are said to be isolating. PSG boss Mauricio Pochettino said that Messi remained in Argentina, where he spent the winter break, and would not travel until testing negative. During a pre-match news conference on Sunday, Pochettino said he could not put a date on Messi's return. PSG's first league game of 2022 after their winter break is against Lyon on Sunday, January the 9th. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Do I need to give this number out, or are we chock-a-block with calls? Let me do it anyway. If you're calling from the United Kingdom, it's 08081 965522. That's 08081 965522. It'll cost you absolutely nothing. Ditto if you're in the United States or Canada. That's toll-free, and the number is +1 844 944 3344. That's +1 844 944 3344. But you better hurry up, because we've only got 60 minutes left, and we've got two fantastic guests to fit into that time. First, the one and only Miss America, Mrs. America, the American icon, my colleague from RT America, Rachel Blevins. Rachel, wonderful to see you again. Happy New Year. I hope it blesses you personally and in your career, which, as I have oft predicted, will definitely end in on Capitol Hill in one form or another, if I'm any judge. But speaking of Capitol Hill, I noticed that Nancy Pelosi has just bought another $20 million worth of stock. Should we be following her?
You know, first and foremost, I do want to say Happy New Year to you too, George, and everyone here at Moats. You know, it's interesting because we talk so much about Nancy Pelosi and about the move she has made and about what is essentially insider trading, especially on Capitol Hill. And it's funny because the members of Congress, of course, if they're asked about it, the majority of them, there are a few, such as Elizabeth Warren and AOC, who will say that they think that insider trading should be banned on Capitol Hill. But the majority of them, people like Nancy Pelosi, will say that they're all for it. And it's hilarious to me because she was actually asked about this just a few weeks ago. And her response was that it should be allowed because the United States has a free market. But when you look at the U.S. economy, when you look at the members of Congress and the decisions that they make, with the knowledge that they have, especially when it comes to those stock purchases, it doesn't really seem that free, does it? When you have insider knowledge, when you have special briefings, and you are specifically making trades as a result of that, all of a sudden that freedom really isn't there in the way that they say it is. It's much more them gaming the system. So I would say, yeah, if you think that you're going to take Best Red along with hers, she's not looking at losing any money anytime soon.
No, that's sure. I mean, the feminists claim that, well, it's her husband that's buying the stock. But here in this country, we have a kind of, certainly when it comes to tax matters and so on, we take the view that a husband and wife are profiting corporately from such things. So unless she never tells during her pillow talk with her exceedingly rich husband anything that she learned during the day, and he's just the oracle who happens to pick the shares that are going up, 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 and up, we have to assume that she is at least giving him a decent steer. Now, staying in DC for a minute, how is the administration coping with the plummeting opinion poll ratings? All these former allies in the liberal media and so on, now they can't seem to stand Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. What's that all about?
Yeah, they're not coping too well. And it's interesting to kind of see the season that we're in, because right now you're really seeing this push, especially by Democrats, by the Biden administration, because we are coming up on the 1-year anniversary of the riots at the U.S. Capitol that occurred on January 6th of last year. And so you're kind of seeing this push to try to bring this back around, to try to talk more about it, because they know that Donald Trump isn't done yet. They know that he is coming back. And so as a result of that, it's kind of a great way for them to shift away from what has been the falling poll numbers and what is looking like it's going to be not the best midterm elections that the Democrats have ever had. Because I know we talk a lot about how the Democrats have the majority in the House, the Senate, and the Oval Office. But the reality is that they only have the majority slightly. So if we go into the 2022 midterm elections and the Republicans gain just 5 additional seats in the House of Representatives, they have the majority. If they gain just a couple of seats in the Senate, they can get the majority. And so we really are looking at razor-thin margins right here. And what you're seeing as a result of that is that Democrats are trying to deflect and say, hey, remember what happened on January 6th? Remember how terrible and horrible we told you that these Capitol riots are. Remember how we didn't focus on the fact that there was a need for enforced police presence, and we instead focused on trying to make a bunch of, crazy protesters look as though they were going to really overthrow the U.S. government. They're going to be saying, let's focus on that and make sure that it doesn't happen again, except, of course, their way of making it not happen again is never the actual way that would make sense.
Well, unpleasant as those events may have been, particularly for workers that were caught in amongst them through no fault of their own, it pales into insignificance compared to actual coup d'etat that the United States government has been responsible for over decades. I mean, they didn't set the parliament on fire like they did in the Ukraine, for example. They didn't murder the president in the presidential palace like they did to Salvador Allende in Chile. They didn't drown the country in blood like the United States did in Indonesia and many, many other places. Is that still able to fly, the January 6th narrative?
Well, that's an excellent point, and I think that the CIA was probably ashamed to watch their own Americans go into the U.S. Capitol and basically just sit there and take selfies. And, I mean, whatever else they were doing, it was laughable that the Democrats continued to try to claim that this group of people who, in some cases, we had guards letting them into the U.S. Capitol building, they were seen there walking around. They seem to have no plan whatsoever. And yet, at the same time, you still get this continued media narrative, which is that there is this underlying domestic terrorist, as it were, here in the country that wants to take over the U.S. government, that wants to put someone like Donald Trump back in power. And it's incredibly concerning for those of us who are already questioning the U.S. government, questioning its motives on a number of things. And then you see this continued push to say, hey, we need to take on the domestic terrorists. Well, it didn't go so well when the United States decided that it was going to take on the international terrorists, so to speak, in its so-called war on terror. So there is a lot of concern here about this narrative. But at the same time, I think it is one of those things where it mainly lies in certain segments of the population and certain political parties, and that luckily does not speak for the entirety of the country.
Moving to New York, the trial ended. A verdict was eventually reached, and to the surprise of many, it was a unanimous verdict of guilty on the sex trafficker Maxwell, erstwhile of this parish, but for the next indeterminate so far number of years, going to be kept at the US taxpayers' expense behind bars. Did the verdict come as a surprise in the circles that you work in?
You know, it wasn't fully a surprise. It was interesting because I know the last time we talked, I was a little bit cynical about this. And I will say I still am, even though we got that guilty verdict, mainly just because this was a trial where we didn't get to hear from Ghislaine herself. We only got to hear from 4 victims when we know that there are far, far many more who would be able to speak to this. And so I think that there's a lot about the entire Jeffrey Epstein saga that still remains kind of covered up. And whenever it came to the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, that was one of those things where you saw really a frustration building online with the lack of media coverage surrounding it, the lack of people who were talking about it. And so the hope is going to be that maybe now she will decide to name some names. I mean, she is looking at spending the rest of her life in prison. So the question then becomes, is she actually going to speak up, and is she going to realize that, you know, she's looking at 2 different ends here, and one of those ends could be with her actually talking and telling the world the truth about what she went through now that she's looking at a continued guilty verdict, whereas before we continued to see this media push to try to, you know, posture her as Jeffrey Epstein's poor girlfriend to try to feel sorry for her. Well, people aren't feeling sorry for her anymore, especially with this verdict in place.
Well, another option is to tell part of the truth, or what one will claim to be part of the truth. Let me run past you what I ran past Kirby Sommers. It's very obvious that Bill Clinton, especially, but also Hillary Clinton, had what now can only be described as an obscene closeness to Jeffrey Epstein, the child rapist, but to a slightly lesser extent, but still discernible, so did Donald Trump. What if Maxwell now tries to put Trump in the frame, and the quid pro quo being, after a decent period, a pardon from Joe Biden or Kamala Harris?
That's actually a really interesting idea there. That's one I haven't thought of. And, you know, that could be plausible. At this point, I think just about anything could be plausible. Now, as far as Joe Biden actually pardoning someone like Ghislaine Maxwell, I mean, I guess that would be just fitting at the end of all of this. But then at the same time, it would be one of those things that we could see come up more and more, especially as the election approaches. And, you know, it's interesting because what we've heard from the victims has specifically been, they've said, yes, Donald Trump was a close friend of Jeffrey Epstein, but we haven't heard nearly the same claims as we have from the victims who have talked about people like Bill Clinton being much more involved with the abuse, people like Prince Andrew, that sort of thing. And so I could definitely see a case where the narrative is kind of spun around to say, hey, let's not talk about all of these other people who are involved in this circle. Let's just look at a few select people that fits our narrative. And you know that the media will actually run with that, and they will actually talk about that because, of course, even now Donald Trump is still one of their favorite people, and he is still one of the people who brings in ratings like no other.
Well, remember, you heard it here first. Finally, and I'm grateful for your time, Rachel, Prince Andrew is in court, or rather his lawyers are, on Tuesday. They're still trying to get this case thrown out. They failed on the first attempt to try and get it ruled out on the basis that the accuser lives in Australia and not in the United States, even though she has a house in the United States and has residency there. So they failed on that, but they're going to try again on Tuesday. Is anyone paying attention to the Prince Andrew story in the United States?
You know, it's not getting nearly as much attention as it should. And I think that also brings up another important point here, which was that the accusers that we did hear from during the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, there were so many of them that were missing. And so I would really hope that there would be much more of a spotlight put on this upcoming trial, especially if we actually get to hear from Prince Andrew, because he has been one of the most guarded people in all of this. And you literally have someone like Virginia Giuffre standing there saying, here are the photos. Here is what I went through. Here is my testimony. This should be a massive scandal that receives international coverage. And yet there's really not that much talk about the fact that he's got a trial upcoming that he may actually have to face. And so I think that it brings it back around to
Well, that's right.
how important it is that people pay attention to shows like yours where you're actually talking about it and giving it some spotlight.
Mine and yours. Thank you very much, Rachel Blevins, American icon. Thanks always for joining us. Will Ghislaine Maxwell ever leave prison? A, never. B, on a gurney. 40% say never. 60% say on a gurney, which for those that don't know what a gurney is, which was most of the people through the glass, all the clever people there, it's the kind of conveyance that Jeffrey Epstein left prison on. Shall I take a call now? Simon is in Arizona. He's a great fan of Tony Blair. He's a brave man also, or he wouldn't be putting that case to me. Go ahead, Simon.
Hi, I just wanted to make the case that Tony Blair is the best labor leader, at least in recent history. I mean, he led the Labor Party to an overwhelming victory in 1997 and in 2001. So the voters gave him another mandate after 4 years. And he also passed devolution in Scotland and Lord's reform as well. So he did do some things that are actually great. And he was able to take power from the Conservative Party after almost 20 years.
Are you in Arizona, or are you in some kind of special institution in Arizona? I mean, are you in Ward 5, as I like to call it, of a hospital somewhere? You're telling me that Tony Blair was the best leader, even though he killed 1 million people in double harness with the knuckle-dragging idiot that was your president at the time. Are you trying to tell me that that is a success story? The man that spawned ISIS, sent it cascading around the world, and it's not stopped cascading ever since. The man who became the peace envoy in the Middle East and brought nothing but war, but who made himself a £100 million fortune. Are you serious, Simon, or is this a wind-up?
Well, I mean, the Iraq War might have been a failure, but, I mean, the conservatives would have gone to Iraq anyway. I mean, he didn't have, much of a choice if he wanted to, stay on George Bush's good side.
Yeah. Yeah. That Adolf Hitler, he was a vegan and he was kind to animals. Okay, the Holocaust might have been... Simon, thank God you're in Arizona and not here in Britain. Ian in Hounslow on the petition. Go ahead, Ian.
Hello, George. I've been trying to get through to tinyurl.com to sign a petition. I can't get through to it.
Well, 300,000 people have now, Ian.
Well, I'm obviously an idiot.
No, it's not that. No, it's not that. It might just be we've boosted the traffic so much. So it's tinyurl.com/Stop Sir Blair, all one word. Stop Sir Blair.
Right. The other thing I wanted
change. That definitely works, yeah.
The other thing I wanted to say, some of the phone-in programs on the radio, they're all trying to excuse Blair, saying that he was the best Prime Minister ever, he won 3 elections.
Well, you see, the script has already reached Arizona.
Yes, absolutely. And if you challenge that narrative, you won't get through.
Wow.
The only people who get through are rabid Zionists, people who are against Brexit, and I'm trying to think of the others, and Tories. They say, I don't vote Labour, but I think you should have the knighthood, which I think says it all, really.
Well, thank God I don't listen to these local radio stations because it would send my blood pressure way too high. Ian, many thanks for your call. Good luck with getting through. People are voting quite substantially with the viewpoint that Ms. Maxwell will not leave the U.S. penitentiary alive. Mark is in North Carolina. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Hey, George, hold on. Let me make...
Yeah. Turn your television down or your radio.
Yeah, YouTube there. Anyway, George, what I wanted to talk about was Blair, what you were talking about Blair before, and all around these slime balls who started the illegal invasion of Iraq. I saw the movie recently, I think it was on, not on Netflix, it was on Bezos' channel there. Anyway, it was called Shock and Awe. I don't know if you ever saw it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And, some of the people who voted for that invasion, including Biden, by the way, Slick Willie's wife there, Mrs. Slick Willie, and also John Kerry. Now, I don't know if you know this about John Kerry. At the end of the Vietnam War, he was one of the biggest protesters against the war. I think he was a leader or one of the leaders of Vietnam Veterans Against the War.
Yep.
And this sleazeball, and I call him sleazeball because he shows what a hypocrite he is, this sleazeball threw all his medals over the wall or into the water, something like that.
I remember, yeah.
And then he made a famous statement. Who wants to be the last man to die for a mistake? All right?
Mm-hmm.
About Vietnam, of course. Yet now, this sleazeball back in the early 2000s voted to send our troops to Iraq under false pretenses. Now, the only part of the media to their credit that stood up against this, and that was what the movie was about, was Night Rider. All right? And I didn't like the fact that Rob Reiner played the part of the head of Night Rider because I can't stand Ryan. You talk about a hypocrite, I can't stand that man, okay? However, the movie was good because it showed you exactly the lies that Bush, Cheney, these war criminals, and I'm sure in your country there, Tony Blair, pushed to the public.
Yeah. Check out my own film on it, The Killings of Tony Blair. Mark, I think you'll like it. It's even better than Shock and Awe. Thanks for the call. Shall I do this question now? On January the 6th last year, supporters of Donald Trump stormed the U.S. Capitol in Washington. Who did the rioters want to hang? A, Nancy Pelosi, B, Joe Biden, C, Vice President Mike Pence. Result after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
Gosh darn, how do you get this thing to work? Is it that one? Is it this one here? Gosh, was this thing built in America? Jeez. Kamala, would you get in here? I can't get the, gosh darn wireless to work.
You know I can't answer questions, Joe, when I'm laughing.
I'm trying to, listen to that Scottish guy on the wireless, the Galloway fella.
Oh, Joe, you're so funny.
I've been pressing this red button on and off and on and off. Heck, I can't get it to work.
Hello, Biden residence.
Mr. President, be advised, we have executed the airstrike on Syria. Confirmed.
That's just great. How long until it gets delivered? I'm starving.
Sputnik has been launched to give you a closer look at everything happening in the world.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Well, the answer was somebody called Mike Pence, whom everyone has now forgotten. Nobody's forgotten Steve Norris. He's one of our most popular guests, even though he's a Conservative. Not just any Conservative. He sat with me in the British Parliament for many years as a Tory MP. He was even a Tory minister and twice the Tory candidate for mayor. He'd have been a better mayor than the Tory that actually did win it in the end, one Boris Johnson. But it's always a pleasure to disagree with him, and I'm sure we shall on one or two points now. Steve Norris, welcome and Happy New Year to you, my friend. I just wanted to make the case that with today's opinion polls showing the Tories now 19 points behind Labour, and Labour led by a block of wood in the red wall seats, that I think Boris Johnson's number's up. I know that you have doubted that before. Do you still doubt it?
Well, one thing you and I know, having been in the UK Parliament, both of us for a long time, is that in midterm, governments lose by-elections. And so far, the Conservatives have lost two, both in very safe Conservative seats. So, you know, decidedly against the run of play, so to speak, but on their own, not fatal. You and I know that Mrs. Thatcher, for example, was 15 points behind Labour between 1979 and 83, and she won, I think, a majority of 147. George, you probably remember that.
Yeah.
So we don't need to take too much notice of by-elections. I think what is interesting, however, is that in the so-called red wall seats, those are the seats that were won by the Conservatives in 2019, some of which have not been Conservative in 100 years. There is now, I think, a growing concern that Boris Johnson may not be the person that will ever allow them to keep those seats. Now, you know, one thing about the Conservative Party is that when the party senses that your time is up, then unlike Labour, ironically, who are soft as a brush on all of this, we just simply change the leader. There is one person you and I remember who was defenestrated by the party in 1990, who is an incomparably better person, both in terms of delivery, tenure, integrity, and in so many other cases than the current incumbent of 10 Downing Street. And that, of course, is Margaret Thatcher. But in 1990, the party perceived her as being more of a liability than an asset, and she was gone. Some people in the party, I think, have never forgiven us for that. But it's a fact of life that the party's MPs simply thought that with the current incumbent as she was, they would lose the forthcoming election. Now that's the challenge to Johnson. Whether the parties, so-called in Downing Street, looked a pretty miserable party to me, but whether the parties are particularly relevant, I don't know. But it kind of builds a sense that, don't you get anything right, Boris, you know, isn't there something you can do that's, you know, that we approve of? But here's one little thought, George, and I know, you know, one of the reasons you and I do get on is because we may come from different political perspectives, but there's a great deal that you can't argue with in politics. Right now, the appalling Mark Drakeford, who leads the Welsh government, and Jimmy Krankie in Scotland have both decided to lock down their countries in the most miserable way. Mrs. Sturgeon has just cancelled Hogmanay for the second year in succession. Nothing seems to be open in Wales, where more than two people might gather together. And Boris took the view that actually, let's just do nothing. And it looks as if he might be right, and they have given him the privilege of showing that they were wrong. Now, I ask you, not necessarily from the perspective of your own party, but just, with the objectivity I know you bring to these things. I think that could change a lot. It wouldn't take much to, perhaps bring Boris back into the fold? What do you think?
I agree. I think he made the right call, that they made the wrong call. I don't know if he listens to the show, but I called on him the week before to make the call that he did, and he did do it. And he was right to do so. And that will certainly mitigate any damage that is currently or had previously been done. But here's the rub, Steve, that in a way, the Conservatives are vulnerable to a pincer. The Liberal Democrats intend to paint the blue wall gold, and the red wall looks a little less secure than it might have done. It was Boris that won those seats. I think no other Tory since Thatcher would have won them. But at the same time, it's looking, according to the polling today, that those same seats that gave him the big majority are now vulnerable to a distinctly undistinguished Labour Party.
Yeah, and I think that is a vulnerability. You know, I rather unusually don't believe that Boris Johnson won those red wall seats. I think it was Jeremy Corbyn who won those red wall seats for the Conservatives for two reasons. One, because whatever your view of Jeremy may be, it's very clear that millions of traditional Labour voters support the monarchy, support the armed services, don't like people running the country down, didn't like the colour of his jib, didn't like some of his friends. And, you know, added to that, of course, this is where the big majority of local authority areas and constituencies voted leave in the 2016 referendum on EU membership. And they, of course, were faced with the arch Remainer, one Keir Starmer, who not only told them effectively that they were wrong, but actually told them he wanted to ask them the question a second time so that this time they could get it right. So I've always believed that this myth that Boris Johnson actually won the red wall seats for the Tories is just that, it's a myth. And what you have to ask yourself is not whether Boris being changed might somehow bring those seats back to the Tories. It's whether there's enough that the Tory government is doing between 2019 and the next election. I think that election could be this year. It'll certainly be next, to perhaps persuade some of those people it's worthwhile trying the Tories again. And I think the jury has to be out on that.
Finally, are you surprised at Her Majesty inviting Sir Tony Blair, as he will be, into her inner sanctum?
Well, I was surprised, but funny enough, a friend of mine said, "Oh, Tony Blair's got a knighthood." And I said, "No, he'll have got the KG." Now, you know, lots of your listeners and viewers, because I know they're all around the world, will be saying, "What on earth is he talking about?" You know, what? Well, a KBE would be a Knight of the Most Honourable Order of the British Empire. Sounds great, slightly ludicrous, but there we go. A KCMG would be a Knight Commander of the Order of St. Michael and St. George. We've got one of those too. And if he'd got either of those, I'd have been astonished. But the reason he got it has nothing to do with Blair himself. The sovereign is the sole arbiter of membership of the Order of the Garter. He is now a Knight of the Most Honourable Order of the Garter. You know, this really is a strange country when it comes to honours, and you and I have both managed to survive without bothering the Lord Chamberlain in that respect. And I don't think I ever will. But the technical answer is this. It's awarded to prime ministers who have served Her Majesty. And Blair was the block. You get rid of Blair, and then you open up the potential of the Order of Garter, the number of members of the Order of Garter, incidentally, limited to Messrs. Brown, Cameron, May, and God help us, even Johnson. Yeah. So that's why it was done. I reckon Tony Blair knew perfectly well what the reaction would be. But when his sovereign told him, Mr. Blair, I am now admitting you to the order. He wouldn't have had much choice. He was basically bed blocking. So, I think it's quite amusing to see the reaction and frankly, unsurprising. But the supreme irony is that this has been visited on him by our sovereign lady, Queen Elizabeth.
The sword might slip, of course, on the day. Thank you very much, Steve Norris, who does not have any letters after his name, except academic ones, I should say, a very distinguished academic man from Oxford and a great classical pianist. I had the benefit of hearing him play very beautifully in a breeze block hotel in Pristina in Kosovo at a time when nobody knew whether a Kosovan was something you ate, drove or drank. Now he's from Liverpool, Steve, and so will I be in Liverpool in March to show the Killing Kelly film. We've got the details there, I think. There it is. It's in Hope Street Theatre. That's not big enough for me. There it is, the Hope Street Theatre. It's Monday, the 28th of March at 7 p.m. So it's from Ticket Quarter. It's very, very limited seats, only 100 seats. So if you are intending on coming, you better act quickly, please. ticketquarter.co.uk/online/killing-Kelly. Now, the poll, will Ghislaine Maxwell ever leave prison? On Twitter, never, say 39% of you. On a gurney, i.e. With your feet dragging, 61%. That's up one, actually. That's on Twitter. On YouTube, 34% say never, 66 on a gurney, and in Telegram, 34 never and 66% exactly the same. Let's get some calls in. Simon in London. Go ahead, Simon.
How you doing, George? You okay?
All right. Nice to hear from you.
Nice to likewise. And Happy New Year, by the way.
Happy New Year, sir.
Yeah, there's many people in politics that sometimes, though you staunchly disagree with on many issues, there's one thing that they do, and it somewhat redeems them and makes you reappraise their character. And I believe in 2018, I think it was, the person that kind of surprised me and yourself as well was Michael Howard, who is the politically complete antithesis of what you are. Yet he was the only man who had the guts to confront Benjamin Netanyahu from the Conservative Party of Israel over the treatment of Palestine.
Yeah.
Now, for me, the only person in British Parliament who told it like it is, when it came to the royal family without any fear whatsoever, who actually got named, thrown out countless times, wore any punishment he got with a badge of honour, who, despite him leaning towards the socialism, I hope he was a libertarian, but he isn't, was your fellow compatriot, the Beast of Bolsover himself, Dennis Skinner. During a hilarious television interview, I don't know whether you know, in the 90s, he rightly said that the monarchy had tried to be regal as celebrity at the same time, and that public were fed up. He famously said that if he was running the country, he would have Diana and Fergie working as marriage counsellors. No doubt this would conjure up the image of General Kurt saying the horror in the minds of your listeners. The Queen would be sweeping horse manure, and the Prince Philip would be running a kebab shop. I myself think that the Beast was being a little too lenient, because I wouldn't have given him a damn thing. The fact that the Queen knighted Tony Blair, who himself said that he would have taken us to the Iraq war, even if Iraq had no weapons of mass destruction, by making up any other nonsense excuse, shows the Queen has nothing but sheer contempt for her subjects, but mostly, George, and more damningly, for the soldiers who fought and died for her.
Well, that is the sorest point of all, Simon. She's given a boost to people like me that upon her demise will be campaigning for a referendum on the future of our monarchy. But much more importantly, from her point of view, she will have wounded the hearts of the soldiers that were sent to fight and some to die on a pack of lies told by the man she's now going to be sitting next to. Thank you very much indeed, Simon, for that. Rose is in Philadelphia. I can never resist. Rose in Philadelphia. Go ahead, Rose.
Good evening, Mr. Galloway. It's been so long since we last talked, but I'd love to exchange pleasantries, of course, first off, but I'm just too upset and outraged at this news about Tony Blair. Absolutely disgusting. But of course, I was not surprised, in all honesty, because on this side of the pond, these war criminals who were partnered with him have also been given honors and libraries and monuments and charity funds and so on. So it's no surprise to me.
Honorary teddy bear status. George W. Bush is hugged by prominent Democrats in public like he was a cuddly teddy bear.
Well, they just showed that they were all on the same side all along. Yeah. There's no such thing as oppositions to each other, as you've mentioned with Labor and Conservative in your country. Neither is there here. But there is international waves of change. If in the last couple of months alone, Nicaragua, Chile, Honduras, Venezuela, all of them have had free, legitimate elections, and their people have spoken. Peru, yes, so many of them, and hopefully Brazil and Colombia are next.
God willing.
They have all spoken, and they are against all of this hegemony and domination and neoliberalism and capital and so on, all of it together. And I feel the winds of change really rising.
I do,
and
also,
I give my salute to them.
I do also, Rose. The number of signatures on this petition has risen by almost 100,000 since we came on the air. It's tinyurl.com/Stop Sir Blair. I do hope that you and everyone will sign it. It's not, you don't have to be British to sign this, because if you think this is an offense against reason to honor and reward somebody for the level of criminality shown by this man, look, if Satan has human form, I believe that that is Satan, that Blair is Satan. I know not everyone believes in the existence of Satan. I happen to do so. And if Satan had human form, it would be that man there. So let's sign this petition. What do you say, Rose?
Let's all sign it and share it and continue and never, ever, ever stop. Ever.
God bless you. Thank you so much indeed, Rose in Philadelphia. Any more calls? Let me go back to the poll, which is now beginning to pick up, but the same results, actually. The petition, as I said, has gone up by nearly 100,000 since we came on the air. It is now well over 300,000. 61% of you think that Ghislaine Maxwell is going to be trolleyed out of the US prison system. 39% of you think that she will never leave the American prison system. Here's Elliot in Florida. Let's see what Elliot thinks. Go ahead, Elliot.
Hey, George. Thank you. And, of course, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, brother. Speaking. Thank you.
I really appreciated that last caller as well. So,
Rose in Philadelphia is one of my favorites.
Yes. I wanted to make a short comment on the possibility of Ghislaine Maxwell getting out in a casket, as you may think, like Jeffrey Epstein. I think there's a big difference between what happened to Jeffrey Epstein in prison and Ghislaine Maxwell, based on the reporting last year, a year and a half ago, I don't know how long, of Whitney Webb on the mega group that funded, or several of the members of the mega group that were very connected to Israel, very connected to organized crime, particularly Les Wexler, who was Jeffrey Epstein's primary funder. He was very connected to an assassination out in the Midwest early on, and he had ties to the New York mob. Anybody in New York knows that the federal prison in New York is very well connected to the mob inside. So Jeffrey Epstein was marked, I think, by that group, whereas Ghislaine Maxwell has the protection of Israeli Mossad, and I'm not sure that her fate is the same.
It depends. No, I mean, it depends what she's prepared to do or not do, doesn't it? If she was prepared now in exchange for a lighter sentence to give evidence against important and powerful people, then the odds of her surviving the prison in order to do so would tumble, it seems to me, because I was from the first minute, and I remain now, absolutely sure that Epstein was whacked. I don't believe a minute that he committed suicide with paper towels.
Of course. That's what I'm saying. I think it was because of the connection of the federal pen in New York and the mob and Wes Wexler. That was a done deal. But Ghislaine Maxwell does not have that connection to expose that Wexler or any of those, and she has the protection of the Mossad. She could very well give up people and get out early and still live.
Okay, thanks, Elliot, for that. There's a legend on the line. It is Norma in Bristol. Norma, welcome. Hello. And Happy New Year to you and your husband.
Thanks, George. Like you, I feel terrible about Tony Blair and so angry, but you know this 1 million signatures, fine. Mm-hmm. I think we'll get it. And this might sound a bit far-fetched when I've heard Steve Norris, but do you think, because we all marched at the beginning in 2003, we could, with our rights of protest, we could actually protest in London, that could be organised, and get 1 million people to march with the petition, and hopefully hand it to Tony Blair's residence. I mean, I know that sounds a bit far-fetched, but it would get the Queen off the hook, basically, wouldn't embarrass her. And I know he would be very humiliated, but he wouldn't rescind it. But at least he'd know, because he is a megalomaniac, he'd know that people actually, you know, he's so unpopular that he'd feel awful.
Yeah,
or I don't suppose...
I agree. I think the longer-term impact of what the Queen has done will be severely to undermine the idea of monarchy, because what we've just witnessed is a decision by one person, a decision that was entirely hers and hers alone to make, to give a substantial reward to a war criminal that is hated by tens of millions in the country.
I feel as angry as you do, but honestly, we have got a right to protest. You get us out 1 million people marching through, and it would show the public how unpopular this awful man is.
Well, let's get the signatures first. If we had 1 million on the march, and we had at least that, we can get 1 million on the petition. Even substantial numbers will have passed from 2003. But their children and even their grandchildren, proud of the fact that their parents and grandparents were on that march, are now here as reinforcements. Norma, thank you. God bless you for that. My Twitter has gone up to 377,000. It went up 500 since the start of the show. Moats, the podcast, has gained another 40 subscribers since we went on the air. And the petition has risen by the best part of 100,000 people. So the petition is tinyurl.com/Stop Sir Blair. I'm beseeching you. It's now 338,000. Let's get 1 million signatures. Let's take the last call. It's a Kenny in Acton. Go ahead, Kenny. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, George. I just wanted to say thank you for including me in the last week's show where you looked over the best parts of the...
Yes, well, you've been a revelation.
I was very moved.
You've become a cult. You've become a cult figure.
Yeah.
Cult, I said.
Well, I'd just like to say to you and all the listeners as well, I think 2022 is going to be a really good year. It's when things will get back to normal and people's lives will improve and people will go back on holidays again and be reunited with their loved ones in different countries across the world.
I feel that. I feel that, but I also feel a song coming on.
Yeah, I'd like to sing a song about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, here we go. There must be lights burning brighter somewhere. Got to be birds flying higher in a sky more blue. If I can dream of a better land where all my brothers walk hand in hand, tell me why, oh why can't my dream come true? Oh, why there must be peace and understanding sometimes. Strong winds of promise that will blow away the doubt and fear. If I can dream of a warmer sun where hope keeps shining on everyone, tell me why, oh why won't that sun appear?
Very beautiful, Kenny. Very, very beautiful. Thank you very much for bringing the New Year show to an end. We weren't able to have the Christmas event that we wanted to have, so a little later, when it's safe to do so, I'm going to organize, my dear friend Shen will be the chief organizer of it, a convention, a whole day in a hotel. You can either stay over or not, it's up to you and at your own expense, but we'll pay for the day. The day will consist of speakers, best bits, and so on, and we'll film it all. And that will give us, in the can, a special edition of the mother of all talk shows, which when our broadcast date clashes with important holidays, as next year it will. Christmas Day will be a Sunday. New Year's Day will be a Sunday. It's not going to be possible to get guests or workers, for the most part, on those 2 days. So we'll have in the can the mother of all talk shows convention. And there'll be all kinds of attractions. So if you're interested in that, I know you're not going to fly from Western Australia, but if you are within striking distance of Britain on that day, we'd be very, very happy to see you. Now, most people think that Ghislaine Maxwell will leave the prison dead, and soon. But those that don't think she'll spend the rest of her life in prison. Either ways, it's very, very bad news for the latest of the Maxwell crime family. It's been marvelous for me. I hope it was for you. It was a very tough 2021. I happen to agree with Kenny that it will be a much better 2022. So if you enjoyed the show, come back next week at the same time, same place, and bring another viewer or listener with you. And don't forget, if you're in striking distance of the great city of Liverpool, get your tickets from Ticket Quarter for my Killing Kelly film show that night. A good night and a happy new year to you all.